Whether you know Dave Bautista as a fearsome WWE superstar or as a galactic guardian named Drax, you're probably a fan. Dave Bautista is a really likable, personable, agreeable sort of person, but it's kind of surprising if you know very much about what Dave Bautista has been through. Bautista was born in 1969, and according to his book, Bautista Unleashed, the Washington, D.C. area he grew up in was one of the nation's poorest at the time. As he was growing up, crack cocaine was about to hit the streets, killings in the neighborhood were common, and according to him, life expectancy for children was, quote, worse than in many third-world countries. Bautista casually mentions that 3 people died on his doorstep before he turned 9. In an interview with the Tampa Bay Times, he elaborates on one particular death where his mother found a man dying of a gunshot wound outside their house. She called for help, but the officials took too long and the man didn't make it. Meanwhile, Bautista, his sister, and several other children were playing outside nearby. They were so accustomed to violent sights that they didn't even shed a tear, and after Bautista's mother saw it, the family promptly moved to San Francisco. In his book, Bautista briefly dwells on his lack of formal education. Though he enjoyed wrestling in high school, his actual grades were far from amazing. By his senior year, which he didn't finish, they were so bad that he wasn't allowed to wrestle. Bautista says not graduating from high school is something he regrets, especially because he knows he absolutely could have done it if he had tried. Whenever he bothered to apply himself, he got good grades, and his teachers were perfectly willing to let him make up assignments. However, young Bautista just didn't care about education, and it remains a sore spot. In an interview with Sport Bible in 2018, Bautista admitted that if he could live his life again, he would focus on getting an education. Bautista might look like he was built at a shipyard, but he has a family just like everyone else, if maybe a slightly more turbulent one. Dave writes in Bautista Unleashed that his dad, a Filipino hairdresser, wasn't really prepared to be a father. Bautista also had an older brother who died in a car accident. Dave's mother, Donna Ray, managed to bring up her children while also struggling with poverty and family issues of her own. After separating from Dave's father, she started having relationships with women, which was a potential social problem for a woman coming from a conservative Greek-American family. In an interview with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, Bautista says, "I never thought of her as my mom, the lesbian. She was Mom, an incredibly strong woman who always did her best to keep me out of trouble and keep me alive." To drive home his pro-LGBTQ stance, he once even threatened boxer Manny Pacquiao for making anti-gay comments. Troubled youths tend to dabble in crime, and young Dave Bautista was no exception. On the podcast Anna Faris is Unqualified, Bautista says his childhood gang used to specialize in petty theft. They'd go down to the houses of kids they knew and steal small stuff like clothes and knickknacks they couldn't afford.
We're always stealing stuff and stealing this, stealing that, and the police would pick us up and my mom would have to come get us and beat the hell out of me.
Bautista has since called his youthful, thieving ways kid stuff, but puberty turned him into a completely different beast. According to the Tampa Bay Times, Bautista grew large and intimidating during his later teenage years and ended up taking on a protector role in his group. He eventually ended up with an imposing body that made a career as a nightclub bouncer a pretty logical choice. Unfortunately, Bautista turned out to be a bouncer of the splatter variety, and he roughed up unwanted clientele so much he was once even charged with assault. If you've ever wondered what it takes to get a body like Dave Bautista's, you might not like the answer. In a 2019 interview with the Tampa Bay Times, Bautista says he spent his 20s in a state he calls reverse anorexia. Despite being a fresh father of 2 daughters, he had no real plans or ambitions, so he got stuck in a loop. He worked all night as a bouncer, then spent hours at the gym, and by the time he got home, he'd sleep all day and start the cycle anew. Despite weighing over 300 pounds and doing virtually nothing but working and lifting, he felt he was never big enough. Bautista spent 10 years on this schedule, which didn't do any favors for his family's financial stability. As he was pushing 30, he realized he had wasted a decade of his life and was in a situation where he had to borrow money just so he could buy Christmas presents for his children.
And I realized that I had accomplished nothing and I had no future and I had nothing to fall back on.
This bleak situation ultimately came with a silver lining as the impoverished Bautista decided to try his hand at wrestling. Dave Bautista entered the physically grueling world of wrestling at a relatively late age. This may be why his first star-making tenure with the company was marred by injuries that sidelined him for months at a time. According to Bautista Unleashed, his first serious injury was a triceps tear that sidelined him for 7 months in 2003. Bleacher Report listed other notorious mishaps. In 2006, he was forced to vacate his WWE World Championship because of yet another torn triceps. In 2008, a similar tear occurred in his hamstring, sidelining him for what was supposed to be 6 to 8 months. He came back in 4 and had just enough time to capture the WWE Championship before a biceps injury forced him to drop the title the very next day. A lower back injury later stopped him from completing a scheduled circuit of shows. In 2006, Bautista allegedly got into a real backstage fight with fellow wrestler Booker T. WrestleView reports the fight took place when the men shot an ad for the upcoming SummerSlam. Bad blood had supposedly been brewing for quite some time because of Bautista's bad attitude. His relatively quick rise to the top of the food chain and lack of humility had angered many of his colleagues. Colleagues were also reported to be quite happy with the way Booker T stood up to Bautista, hugging and high-fiving Booker afterward. WrestleView also reported that Bautista confirmed things had been escalating for a while. It must be noted, though, that the initial reports of the fight's legitimacy appear to have come from the WWE itself, and Bautista and Booker T were promoting their title match at SummerSlam. According to Forbes, there have been allegations that Bautista was aided by every dishonest athlete's best friend, steroids. In 2007, the aftermath of the Chris Benoit case led the WWE to take a long, hard look at the company's wellness policy, and an ESPN report eventually linked Bautista and a number of other wrestlers to a large doping ring. Bautista strongly denied the allegations and insisted that he was both tested regularly and operating, quote, in full compliance with the WWE wellness program. While he ultimately avoided suspension, the cloud of steroid suspicion has hovered over his head ever since. Wrestling Inc. and Bleacher Report have both reported on industry whispers about past steroid use, and some of his injuries seem oddly consistent with the ones steroid users commonly suffer. According to Sportskeeda, Bautista has quit WWE twice, in 2010 and 2014. His first departure was reportedly because of a lack of movie opportunities, as Bautista discovered WWE studios wouldn't offer him roles. He asked if he could go outside the WWE and audition for other films, but was allegedly told to get dressed for a match. Bautista handed in his notice and left the company a year later, and on his last night, few people bothered to thank him or say goodbye. He made a comeback in 2013, but creative differences soon drove him out again. He reportedly wanted a slow build-up as a bad guy, but the WWE decided to strongly push him as a hero, and the fans didn't love it. According to Bautista, it didn't help that when he pitched a cross-promotion with Guardians of the Galaxy, WWE big shots Triple H and Stephanie McMahon basically laughed in his face. Bautista returned to the WWE one last time in 2019 when he wrapped up his wrestling career in a WrestleMania match against Triple H. Bautista lost. The life of a top WWE superstar isn't an easy one to mesh with private life, and Dave Bautista has been less than successful at it. In an interview with Sport Bible, Bautista admitted that the year-round grind of being on the road with the WWE didn't do any favors for his marriage. According to Australian Broadcasting Corporation, he ruined 2 of his marriages while he was on the road, and it wasn't just his constant absence that was the problem. The superstar admits he was a prolific cheater, and that obviously also hurt the people he loved. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation reports that while Dave Bautista doesn't drink or do drugs, he was no different from his wrestling peers who struggled with addictions. His drug of choice just happened to be a little different. Although he didn't realize it at the time, he was addicted to carnal pleasures while touring with the WWE. When the naturally shy and timid man became popular and suddenly had scores of girls interested in him, he says he was completely unequipped to handle it and dove in head first. While he didn't think it was a problem at the time, he was eventually told that his constant womanizing was a problem. He says he has since matured and changed because he doesn't want to hurt his business or be a bad role model for his children. Bautista's role as Drax the Destroyer in Guardians of the Galaxy propelled him to mainstream fame, but according to Wired, the dream gig could get surprisingly nightmarish. Bautista was terrified when he auditioned. His first day on set wasn't any better because, apart from his own nerves, he was unfortunate enough to start filming 2 weeks later than everyone else. When he arrived, the anxious giant had to scramble to catch up. When the existential terror went away, physical discomfort took over. The role required buckets of makeup and body paint, which took 4 hours to apply and another hour and a half to remove. Because the full upper body treatment didn't really allow the actor to sit down, he had to go through the entire process leaning on a saddle-like perch. However, getting it all put on wasn't as bad as having to don the Drax costume for many consecutive days. He says that by the 3rd or 4th day, his skin started to get sensitive, and by the 6th consecutive Drax day, he just wanted to peel his skin off. A large, muscular wrestler can often carry the stigma of people assuming he's a big, stupid lug, and Dave Bautista faces an extra hurdle. He's dyslexic. In an interview on Chris Jericho's Talk is Jericho podcast, Bautista says his dyslexia has made things like table reads for Avengers Infinity War and other films pretty difficult for him. Still, the wrestler has kept a sense of humor about his condition and has been known to reply to badly spelled Twitter insults with friendly advice about how to deal with dyslexia.
You Earthers have hang-ups.
As it happens, Bautista isn't the only Guardian of the Galaxy who deals with dyslexia. According to the New York Times, his castmate Zoe Saldana is also dyslexic, and Dyslexic Advantage has praised both stars for publicly speaking out about their struggles.
A devastating diagnosis before his 30th birthday, multiple retirements, and loss of his creative outlets. It's been a difficult road for Michael J. Fox, but the star has pushed forward in both his life and career. This is his tragic story. In any discussion about Michael J. Fox's misfortunes, one can hardly avoid mentioning Parkinson's disease. As CBS News reports, Fox was at the height of his fame and personal glory in 1991 when he was diagnosed with a degenerative condition. At the time, the 29-year-old was a massively famous star who had just married his Family Ties co-star Tracy Pollan. As you'd probably expect, the news was devastating, and during the 7 years Fox chose to keep his situation out of the limelight, he sought treatments that included drugs and surgery. Initially, Fox kept a pretty tight lip on his situation. He also felt bad about Pollan, feeling that the diagnosis was an unfairly heavy load for her to bear as well. Describing the initial impact of the news, Fox had this to say: "So very early in the marriage, she got this dumped on her. And the moment that I told her I was realizing was the last time we cried about it together. We haven't cried about Parkinson's since. We've just dealt with it and lived our lives, but we cried about it that first time." Since revealing his diagnosis in 1998, Fox has set up the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. And while he doesn't make light of the horrors of the condition, he remains a self-professed optimist.
As I began to understand what research might promise for the future, I became hopeful that I would not face the terrible suffering so many with Parkinson's endure.
Life was difficult for Michael J. Fox after he received his Parkinson's disease diagnosis in 1991. According to People, this led him down some fairly dark roads for a while. Before getting married, Fox suffered from self-described rock star tendencies, and as he told the New York Times Magazine in 2019, his younger self was known to pull crazy stunts. Fox told the outlet, "I would ride in a limo with my head out the sunroof and a beer in each hand." Fox said goodbye to his more hard-drinking ways when he married Tracy Pollan in 1988, but the diagnosis soon caused him to start again in an effort to cope with the situation. This went on until 1992, when Pollan found him passed out in their living room after a night of drinking. Fox found out there and then just how fed up she was with his alcohol abuse. Describing the moment his wife faced off with him, Fox had this recollection: "I did a slow scan up from her feet to her face, expecting to find her really angry. She wasn't. She was just bored." After this, Pollan simply asked him, "Is this what you want? Is this what you want to be?" Fox stopped drinking there and then and turned to therapy as a far healthier coping mechanism. If you or anyone you know is struggling with addiction issues, help is available. Visit the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website or contact SAMHSA's National Helpline at 1-800-662-HELP-4357. Michael J. Fox has made many of his roles outright iconic, which makes it all the more surprising to hear that he came close to missing his first major role in Family Ties. According to producer Gary David Goldberg, he initially didn't like Fox due to a flubbed audition in which the actor had made the character of Alex P. Keaton too dark. As such, Goldberg pushed for Matthew Broderick to get the role instead. When Broderick ultimately declined, the persistent casting director convinced Goldberg to begrudgingly allow Fox a second audition round, and fortunately, the young actor nailed it. This must have been a pretty important moment for him because in an interview with the New York Post, Fox revealed that Broderick used to be something of an accidental professional nemesis to him. Fox remembered, "He'd usually go in first for auditions and you'd hear hands shaking. I was always losing jobs to Matthew Broderick." Perhaps ironically, Fox's commitment to Family Ties ended up nearly costing him the even more iconic part of Marty McFly in Back to the Future, according to People. Goldberg guarded Fox so intensely that although the makers of the movie really wanted the actor to play Marty, they ultimately cast Eric Stoltz in the role. However, the producers soon realized that Stoltz was a bad fit for the part and promptly unleashed a charm arsenal on Goldberg until he agreed to allow Fox to portray Marty. The fact that Michael J. Fox has Parkinson's disease may be a little abstract for those of us who aren't familiar with the condition. In order to get a sense of the actor's struggles, one only has to look at what Fox has had to go through to keep things in check. According to People, the actor is reliant on his medication in order to keep his tremors under control. And per CNN, in early 1998, he went under the knife for a brain operation called a thalamotomy to help control the Parkinson's tremors. As the Irish Times notes, Fox's lack of mobility means that he's often confined to a wheelchair during his travels. a situation even the generally optimistic actor has come to detest.
I have a wheelchair that I use every now and then. It still sucks.
Fox told the Irish Times, "Generally, the person in control is a stranger, an airport or hotel employee. I'm sure that if we could look each other in the eye, we'd recognize our mutual humanity, but often in the wheelchair, I'm luggage. I'm not expected to say much, just sit still." So what would happen if Fox neglected to take his medication and allowed the condition to take over in full? As the actor has written in his book, No Time Like the Future, the answer is grim. Absent a chemical intervention, Parkinson's will render me frozen, immobile, stone-faced, and mute, entirely at the mercy of my environment. Despite his struggles with his health, Michael J. Fox has amassed a pretty amazing acting resume with an impressive 76 on-screen roles and a great number of other credits to his name. As befits both his long, hard road and his amazing tenacity, he bears the distinction of having retired from the industry not once, but twice. Per Fox's official website, the actor's first official retirement came in 2000, when he left his role as Spin City's main character, Mike Flaherty, after wrapping up his 100th episode. For years, he focused all his energies on patient advocacy and working with the Parkinson's Research Foundation bearing his name. However, he eventually decided to return to acting after a decade away from the screen, and he even took on a number of starring and recurring roles in major productions like The Good Wife. According to ABC News, the second and possibly final retirement came in 2019, when the 60-year-old star revealed that his diminishing vocal talents had caused him to call it quits with acting. Fox revealed in 2020, "I reached a point where I couldn't rely on my ability to speak on any given day, which meant I couldn't act comfortably at all anymore. So last year, I gave it up." As People reports, Fox has also named his increasingly ailing short-term memory as a major reason acting has been getting more and more difficult for him. Michael J. Fox's decades-long experience with Parkinson's disease has obviously not been an easy one, and as the actor revealed in a 2020 interview with People, it has taken a toll on him, and some of the things he's lost are quite surprising.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks. I hate it, and I wish I wasn't in this situation.
Unfortunately, they include one of the most important tools at an actor's disposal, memory. It's very hard to act if you have no idea what your lines are, and this is particularly true for Fox, who has relied heavily on his great memory when he's prepared for his roles. Fox said, "I always had a real proficiency for lines and memorization, and I had some extreme situations where the last couple of jobs I did were actually really word-heavy parts. I struggled during both of them." Fox has also addressed the memory changes that can come with Parkinson's disease on his official website. To educate people affected by the condition about the ways it may alter the ways a person remembers and thinks, and to offer ways to cope with the situation, Fox's team has created a downloadable guide about the subject called Thinking, Memory, and Parkinson's Disease. In 2006, Michael J. Fox became the target of conservative criticism for appearing in a campaign video for a Democratic candidate vying for a Senate seat in Missouri. Fox's appearance in the ad was noticeably disheveled, as the tremors brought on by his Parkinson's disease were plain to see. Influential and controversial conservative talk show host Rush Limbaugh immediately targeted Fox, claiming that the actor was either deliberately off his medication or even playing up his symptoms. Fox was quick to dismiss the claims, noting that his condition was far too severe to skip medication for a fact. Fox said, "At this point now, if I didn't take medication, I wouldn't be able to speak." He also revealed that while his appearance in the ad indeed showed him in a sorrier state than usual, the reason behind this was very different than what Limbaugh speculated. Fox said, "The irony is that I was too medicated. I was dyskinesic, because the thing about being symptomatic is that it's not comfortable. No one wants to be symptomatic. It's like being hit with a hammer." As Fox's official website notes, dyskinesia is a condition that may affect those with Parkinson's disease and can cause all sorts of uncomfortable, involuntary movements of the body. In other words, definitely not the kind of thing you'd invite upon yourself to earn sympathy points in a campaign ad. In all fairness, Limbaugh soon apologized. It's easy to think of Michael J. Fox as a political actor. After all, his first famous role was Alex P. Keaton in Family Ties, a young Republican who constantly clashed with his flower power parents Stephen and Elise, played by Michael Gross and Meredith Baxter. Per CBS News, by the mid-2000s, Fox was quite notable for his real-life political work too, having publicly endorsed several political figures to the point of appearing in campaign ads. Interestingly, Fox's personal beliefs have often appeared to lean toward those of Democrats, but the actor himself has been quick to note that he's also supported and voted for Republican candidates. Ultimately, he says he doesn't much care for politics at all, but has been drawn in because of his personal advocacy. Fox has said, "I don't really care about politics." He's also noted that Parkinson's disease is a nonpartisan problem that requires a bipartisan solution. Michael J. Fox is a massively creative individual. You might know that he's a talented actor, but as People notes, he's also adept in a number of other areas, including sketching and music. According to Guitar World, in fact, Fox is a competent guitarist who played the guitar in the iconic Johnny B. Goode scene in Back to the Future, which is extremely impressive when you take into account the fact that he also performed the signature stage moves of several real-life six-string legends in the scene. He even played with Joan Jett as recently as 2018. In fact, historically, one of the few creative endeavors Fox has openly admitted to being bad at is dancing. The actor has stated, "I dance like a duck, I can't dance." Unfortunately, Fox's Parkinson's disease has taken a number of these outlets from him one by one. Fox said in 2020, "My guitar playing is no good, my sketching is no good anymore, my dancing never was good, and acting is getting tougher to do." Fortunately, there's still something he's able to do. The actor revealed, "So it's down to writing. Luckily, I really enjoy it." And luckily for the rest of us, he's quite good at it too. According to Fox's official website, he's written no less than 4 books so far, 3 of which bear the proud words New York Times bestseller on the cover. Brushes with death, family tragedies, box office flops, and divorce drama. The late Bob Saget went through a lot on his path to becoming America's dad. In his 2014 memoir, Dirty Daddy, Bob describes the trauma that his parents, Benjamin and Rosalind Saget, had suffered just 2 years before his birth. In 1954, Rosalind gave birth to twin boys named Robert and Faith at the hospital in the family's hometown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. What the family didn't know at the time, however, was that the hospital was dealing with an outbreak of dysentery, which proved fatal to the twins within days of their birth and which took the lives of several other newborns. Bob also explains that he didn't enjoy the typical perks of a traditional father-son relationship growing up. Benjamin began his career as a butcher in a supermarket before working his way up into management, smoking 6 packs of cigarettes a day in the process. When Bob was 6, his father suffered a massive heart attack and had another one 6 months later that almost killed him. As such, though his father was a constant presence in his life, his health issues meant he and Bob didn't share typical father-son pastimes. As biography details, Saget didn't perform particularly well at school, with his low grades becoming even worse after his family relocated from Pennsylvania to California, though the Sagets soon returned to their home state. Saget graduated high school, and though he had harbored dreams of becoming a doctor, he was encouraged to pursue a career in a creative field after enrolling at Philadelphia's Temple University. There, he studied film and won an award for a documentary short he made in 1978. While he was then accepted into graduate school at the University of Southern California, the future comedian soon dropped out, later citing his own vanity for his lack of motivation. But as he explained in an interview with the Saturday Evening Post in 1990, a sudden brush with death changed his mentality. "I was a cocky, overweight 22-year-old. Then I had a gangrenous appendix taken out, almost died, and I got over being cocky or overweight." In his memoir, Bob Saget suggests 2 ways in which comedy has worked as a survival tactic throughout his life. To begin with, Saget describes both his childhood at home and at school as survival of the wittiest, and that while he wasn't a tough kid, being ready with a smart comeback could work as an effective rebuttal against bullies. Though Saget does recall getting bloodied in fights that broke out after he was the subject of anti-Semitic remarks. But Saget also saw comedy as a mechanism by which to turn suffering into something joyous. In his memoir, Saget claims that he inherited his sense of humor from his father, writing, "Like me, my dad dealt with death and all the hardships in life through humor, sick and weird humor. Not always funny, but always some kind of metaphysical release from the pain." What emerges is the idea of off-color humor as a release valve for coping with life's tragedies, which Saget would have to deal with throughout his life. Elsewhere, Saget writes, "It was this part of my DNA that allowed me to lose 2 of the most important people in my life and push even harder to pursue a career in making people laugh." The 2 important people that Bob Saget lost tragically young were his beloved older sisters, who both died in their parents' lifetimes in heartbreaking circumstances. Saget wrote in his book, "I loved my sisters, Andy and Gay, very much. They were both school teachers, really good ones, which means they were underpaid and loved to impart as much wisdom and goodness as they could on their students. Andy died at the age of just 34 from a brain aneurysm, while Gay died at 47 just a few years after being diagnosed with systemic scleroderma, a chronic autoimmune disease that hardens and tightens the skin and connective tissues." Following the deaths of his sisters, Saget committed to fundraising, becoming a board member of the Scleroderma Research Foundation and raising awareness of the disease. Following Gay's death, Saget also directed a TV movie for Hope, which was based on the story of her life. Around the time of the birth of his first daughter, Bob Saget was beginning to make steps towards a career on the small screen. As he writes in his memoir, Saget's first major TV role was as a sidekick on a CBS show called The Morning Program, with Saget hired to provide the show with a comedic edge.
It's time now for This Week in History.
However, Saget lasted only 6 months in the role and was let go amid concerns that his performance wasn't a match for the show's audience, a major setback for a comedian with a young family in the early stages of his career. Saget later claimed, per biography, "The affiliates were upset. I was considered too hot for the morning, whatever that is."
I hope you don't get herpes. It's a hair. It's a hair. Did you hear that?
Thankfully, he soon landed what would prove to be his most iconic role, that of Danny Tanner, the lead in the long-running sitcom Full House, which would make Saget a household name. Despite the lewd material of his stand-up shows, Bob Saget has always been known as a devoted family man, whose private life mirrors that of his most famous on-screen roles. But the comedian's love life wasn't always straightforward. Though Saget and his high school sweetheart Sherry Kramer would go on to have 3 daughters together following their marriage in 1983, their relationship disintegrated in 1997, as the Sun-Sentinel reports, with Kramer citing irreconcilable differences in the court documents. However, Saget and Kramer remained in contact, with the comedian getting in touch with his ex-wife to get her permission to include details of their life together in his memoir. In an interview with Parade, Saget expresses the joy that the children they had together brought to his life, saying, "The best thing I've done, the highest thing in my whole life is my daughters. If everything in my life is raised to the level of how great they are, then that would be a great thing to have achieved." Saget finally remarried in 2018 to Kelly Rizzo, telling Closer Weekly at the time that after his divorce more than 2 decades earlier, he never expected to find love again. Despite his many successes in front of the camera, Bob Saget still harbored the same filmmaking ambitions that he did as a student, and throughout his career was on the lookout for opportunities to put his directorial abilities to the test. One such opportunity came in the late 1990s when he was approached by his friend Norm Macdonald, who had recently become a major star thanks to his role on Saturday Night Live and his singular anchoring of the show's popular Weekend Update segment, to direct a movie the comedian had written, 1998's Dirty Work. In his memoir, Saget describes directing the movie as the wildest experience of his career. But while the movie came to be loved by both its creators and the comedian's fans, Dirty Work was a disappointment, both critically and commercially.
There's 2 kinds of people in this world, those who get stomped on and those who do the stomping.
Despite this, numerous sources claim that a sequel was in the works, with Norm Macdonald tweeting in 2019 that he had finished writing the script at Saget's behest. On the final page of Bob Saget's 2014 memoir, an author's note reads, "As the book went to press, I lost my loving mother at the age of 89. A beloved wife, mother, grandmother, aunt, and friend, she touched countless lives through the generations and will always be remembered. This is for you, Mom." Shortly after publication, Saget suffered another loss after his friend, the beloved comedian Robin Williams, was found dead at the age of 63. Saget told Culturated, "I took his loss very hard. I met him when I was 21, and he is mentioned throughout the book. How he left us is obviously not how I will remember him." But just as Saget always turned to comedy as a way of dealing with loss, the death of Williams also gave him a new sense of perspective and motivation to pursue his craft and make the most of the time he had left. He continued, "I can't waste time on things I used to as a younger man, just going crazy about things that I had no control over. It's time to really enjoy my work and my craft and just go out and do it well." In the final months of his life, Bob Saget was to suffer one more tragic loss, Norm Macdonald, who sadly died in September 2021 after suffering with leukemia privately for many years. The 2 comedians were more than colleagues. As discussed on Macdonald's Quarantined video series in March 2020, Saget was the first comedian that the aspiring 15-year-old Macdonald saw live.
And then I, afterwards, like an idiot, went up to you at the bar, like people do, like as if they're part of the act. I'm like, "Hey, should we talk?"
The 2 struck up a friendship, and it was this encounter that Macdonald recalled when looking for someone to direct Dirty Work. The 2 maintained a strong friendship, with Macdonald providing a memorable performance during 2008's Comedy Central roast of Bob Saget, and Saget later appearing on Macdonald's podcast, Norm Macdonald Live. Following news of Macdonald's death, Saget published an emotional dedication to the late comedian, describing the loss of Macdonald as, quote, "a knife in the heart for all of us who were close to him and all of you who loved him." In a statement to The Hollywood Reporter, Bob Saget's family confirmed his death on January 9, 2022. "We are devastated to confirm that our beloved Bob passed away today. He was everything to us, and we want you to know how much he loved his fans, performing live and bringing people from all walks of life together with laughter." The suddenness of his death was deeply shocking. In his final tweet, Saget shouted out the crowd who saw his final performance, calling them an appreciative audience, and said he was happily addicted again to doing stand-up. Saget's wife, Kelly Rizzo, had spoken to him just hours before his death, with a source telling People magazine that he, quote, sounded really happy and that he was scheduled to fly home the next day. As news of the sudden and tragic death of Bob Saget made headlines around the world, countless celebrities took to social media to pay tribute to their friend and to share their memories of a gregarious and caring colleague. Among them were Saget's co-stars on his career-defining show Full House, including John Stamos, who had maintained a close friendship with Saget since first portraying the lead character Danny Tanner's brother-in-law Jesse in 1987. Stamos tweeted, "I am broken, I am gutted, I am in complete and utter shock. I will never ever have another friend like him. I love you so much, Bobby." Dave Coulier, who played Tanner's best friend Joey, said in a tweet, "My heart is broken. I love you, Bob." Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, who together portrayed Saget's on-screen daughter, described Saget as a loving, compassionate, and generous man, while co-stars Andrea Barber and Candace Cameron Bure also shared their shock and pain on learning of Saget's death. The following day, the cast and crew of Full House reunited online in tribute to Saget. A statement posted on Stamos' Instagram read, 35 years ago, we came together as a TV family, but we became a real family, and now we grieve as a family. He was a brother to us guys, a father to us girls, and a friend to all of us. Bob, we love you dearly. We ask in Bob's honor, hug the people you love. No one gave better hugs than Bob.
John Candy's time at the top didn't last all that long. He unexpectedly died in 1994. His surprisingly early death was one final tragedy in a life overshadowed with struggle and sadness. Here's a look at the sometimes difficult and challenging life of John Candy. Tragedy struck John Candy at an early age, upending his young life and leaving behind a specter of sadness and loss. Candy was born in 1950 to middle-class parents Evangeline and Sidney Candy, Sidney earning a living as a car salesman in Toronto. When John Candy was just 5 years old and his brother Jim was 6, Sidney Candy unexpectedly died from complications of heart disease at only 35. According to Laughing on the Outside, The Life of John Candy, Evangeline Candy had little choice but to make the economical decision to move her family away. She took her 2 young kids to a very small bungalow in the working-class Toronto borough of East York, which they shared with John Candy's grandparents and aunt. The knowledge that his father died from a delicate heart stuck with Candy for his entire life. According to family members, it was always in the back of his mind, and he ultimately couldn't escape it. Although he fully embraced comedy and acting, and he certainly gave it his all, going into the entertainment industry wasn't John Candy's first plan. He was initially an athlete, playing offensive tackle on his high school football team in the Toronto area, and according to The Hollywood Reporter, he harbored dreams of going pro someday. Any hopes of playing in the Canadian Football League, such as for the Toronto Argonauts, dissipated when a severe knee injury permanently ended his playing days. Candy turned his attention to performing instead, and soon after as a young adult, he thrived in Canada's burgeoning comedy scene. But he never entirely put football aside. Being a movie star afforded Candy the opportunity to become a part owner of a CFL team, and his favorite one at that, the Toronto Argonauts. In 1991, alongside fellow internationally known Canadian celebrity Wayne Gretzky, Candy put up the money to purchase a 10% stake in the Argos. Later that year, the newly invigorated squad won the CFL's championship, the Grey Cup. Unfortunately, the Argonauts' other owners decided to sell the team in 1994, ending Candy's brief tenure as a CFL big shot. The Second City comedy troupe, with branches in Chicago and Toronto, proved so successful and popular that, in 1976, the Canadian wing took its act to Ontario's Global Television Network. The theatrical cast that came along for SCTV is legendary, and it included Harold Ramis, John Flaherty, Eugene Levy, Catherine O'Hara, Dave Thomas, and John Candy. It aired irregularly and primarily in Canada until 1980, at which point Candy left, only to return after the show was picked up in 1981 by US-based NBC to air after Saturday Night Live. The exposure made stars out of most of SCTV's players, particularly John Candy. Portraying broad and memorable characters in films seemed like a foregone conclusion for the star,
who created so many for SCTV's various iterations. Among his most beloved characters were TV personality Johnny LaRue, a dark version of Beaver Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver, Julia Child, Japanese movie monster Grogan, and the self-explanatory Harry, the guy with a snake on his face. Like the Brat Pack of teen actors who frequently worked together in 80s teen movies, funny films of the 1980s were dominated by a loose, unnamed, but obviously connected handful of actors. Almost all of them had honed their skills and found fame via Saturday Night Live and the various SCTV series. They all worked together on TV, and they continued to work together out of comfort and a shared comedic language when they moved on to big-budget films. John Candy was an important member of this club, and he stayed loyal to his comedy pals throughout his career. For example, all of his screen time as a traveling polka musician in Home Alone is spent alongside SCTV co-star Catherine O'Hara. And he has a small role in Little Shop of Horrors, which featured SCTV's Rick Moranis, Stripes' Bill Murray, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles' Steve Martin. Candy also enjoyed a particularly special and fruitful relationship with filmmaker John Hughes.
Happy birthday! Woo!
He starred in a number of projects that Hughes wrote or directed, including Uncle Buck, Home Alone, Career Opportunities, The Great Outdoors, National Lampoon's Vacation, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Even though he found major success in the large, lucrative world of Hollywood filmmaking, John Candy never abandoned the much smaller and more modestly budgeted Canadian entertainment industry that had given him his big breaks. In the 80s and 90s, the A-list movie star concurrently dabbled in movies and TV shows with predominantly Canadian casts, or which were not widely seen outside Canada. In 1981, Candy co-starred in Stripes, but also appeared in an episode of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's Tales of the Klondike. 2 years later, he cameoed as a cheery security guard in Vacation, but had a bigger role in Going Berserk, alongside SCTV pals Joe Flaherty and Eugene Levy. Candy had a big 1985, with roles in Summer Rental, Brewster's Millions, and the CBC mockumentary The Canadian Conspiracy. One of Candy's final films was the Canadian TV movie Hostage for a Day, which he also directed as it filmed in various locations across his beloved home country of Canada. Candy also sent up his own pro-Canada sentiments. One of John Candy's last completed movies was the satirical comedy Canadian Bacon, in which he was cleverly cast as a patriotic American sheriff who tries to lead an invasion of Canada. While he did appear in some of the most important and enduring comedies of the 1980s, National Lampoon's Vacation, Stripes, The Blues Brothers, and more, John Candy didn't make it into Ghostbusters, the highest-grossing comedy of the entire decade. It even starred a number of Candy collaborators, including Stripes star Bill Murray, his friend Dan Aykroyd, and SCTV colleague Harold Ramis. John Candy was actually supposed to be in the movie from the start, offered the role of lovelorn nerd-turned-unwitting keymaster vehicle Louis Tully. Director Ivan Reitman reached out to Candy with a treatment outlining the story, but the actor wasn't impressed. Reitman later recalled the comedy legend didn't get Ghostbusters, and in response tried to pitch a version of the character who would speak with a German accent. Reitman politely turned down Candy's suggestions, deeming the additions over the top and unnecessary, and so Candy bowed out of consideration. His SCTV castmate Rick Moranis got the role instead, although Candy did make a cameo in the star-studded music video for Ray Parker Jr.'s Ghostbusters theme song. John Candy's development as an actor in the 1970s and his rise to stardom in the 1980s ran concurrent with a growing problem with addictions. In 1971, at the suggestion of comedian friend Dan Aykroyd, Candy auditioned for the Second City Comedy Company. He made it into the troupe, joining the likes of John Belushi, Gilda Radner, and Bill Murray. That's when the trouble started, as Candy moved to Chicago and took up the comedy life of staying up late, drinking, and getting heavily into drugs. Unfortunately, these habits built on some other long-standing tendencies. Candy had begun smoking as a teenager, and by the time he reached adulthood, he was going through a pack a day. The legendary actor would continue smoking for the rest of his life, and that habit, combined with his drug use, would prove to be a harmful cocktail of substances. One of John Candy's closest friends and comedy idols early in his career was John Belushi. Like Candy, Belushi worked out his chops at Second City and collaborated with Dan Aykroyd, and all three starred together in The Blues Brothers and the war comedy 1941. Tragically, the hard-living John Belushi died of a drug overdose in March 1982 at the age of just 33. Candy, who like Belushi was both heavy-set and engaged in some unhealthy habits of his own, took the death extremely hard. According to the book Laughing on the Outside, The Life of John Candy, John Belushi's death was literally sobering. Actor Dan Hennessy later said that Candy saw the death of his friend and hero as a message to get his own life in order. Candy quit cocaine at that point, but the untimely demise of his friend also sent the actor into a deep funk. Friend John Stocker reported that Candy was so upset in the immediate wake that he fell into a depressive state so bad that he wouldn't leave his home or answer his phone. Health was a consistent worry to John Candy, and to those who loved the actor. His father had died from heart problems at the exceedingly young age of 35, leaving behind the possibility that Candy could die from a similar condition, and too soon at that. The actor struggled with his weight throughout his adult life. His weight reportedly usually hovered around 275 pounds, although he made great efforts to lose weight throughout his life via diets, exercise, and trainers, all of which he had a hard time sticking with. After he turned 40, he self-medicated a sudden onset of panic attacks with overeating. His weight increased, particularly after he pulled out of hosting the 1992 Canadian Genie Awards because it promoted Candy's presence with the crude tagline, quote, "We got the biggest star we could find." Before long, Candy's scale number was reportedly around 330 pounds. In addition to his tendency to overeat, Candy was also a regular smoker, which may have helped contribute to his declining health. Whether it was genetics, habits, or a combination of the two, Candy would ultimately go the way his father did and die of a fatal heart attack. In 1994, Candy reported to the set of his new film, Wagons East. The film was a Western comedy in which he starred as James Harlow, a cowboy and wagon master hired to take a group of unhappy settlers away from the brutal frontier and back to their homes on the East Coast. A box office bomb and critical failure, Wagons East was an ignominious bomb in the stellar career of John Candy and the last movie he'd ever make. On March 4th, 1994, Candy shot his final day of scenes for Wagons East and celebrated by cooking up a late-night dinner for his assistants. That night, he also called co-stars Richard Lewis and Robert Picardo just to chat, and he also phoned his young children at home back in Los Angeles to say goodnight. Then the actor headed to bed, but he never woke up. While he slept, he suffered a heart attack. John Candy was just 43, and his death rocked the entertainment world. According to The Hollywood Reporter, John Candy met the woman who would become his wife, Rosemary, in the late 1970s. They were set up on a blind date and hit it off, then started to spend more time together when Candy asked her to help him type a script. She went on to become an abstract painter and ceramics artist, and started a family with the comedian. After marrying in 1979, the couple had 2 children, daughter Jennifer and son Chris. When their father died in 1994, Jennifer was 14 and her brother was 9. Both Candy kids kept up their father's legacy in entertainment and went into television and film. Jennifer Candy appeared on episodes of Liv and Maddie and Sydney to the Max and produced the TV shows Prom Queen and Cockpit. Chris Candy has popped up on shows like Murder in the First and in a sketch on The Late Late Show with James Corden. Fittingly, both Candy kids got their start on a project of their father's, voicing characters on the Saturday morning cartoon Camp Candy.
Have you ever been watching Home Alone or Succession and thought that the Culkin siblings must be drawing from personal experience? Well, you might be onto something. The family history is filled with plenty of tragedy. Kit Culkin and Patricia Brentrup, who never married, lived in a 2-bedroom, railroad-style walk-up on 94th Street and 2nd Avenue in New York City. They would eventually have 5 boys and 2 girls, who all slept in bunk beds in one room. Kit worked at a Catholic church, which allowed the kids to have discounted fees at the parish school, while Patricia worked for a telephone answering service. As casting director Billy Hopkins told New York Magazine in 2001, "They were so poor, I had to use my own money to make sure that Macaulay got to and from rehearsal. He would crawl under the bleachers at the theater to look for change that had fallen out of people's pockets. They were like the Beverly Hillbillies." Despite all that, Patricia worked hard to give the kids some semblance of a normal life, such as a Christmas tree and family dinners. That held everything together before Macaulay began earning millions as a child actor. Patricia recounted to The Telegraph in 1996, "We went through the hungry years, the struggling, and when we became successful, I thought we'd just sit back, enjoy it, and relax. Instead, we were happier living hand to mouth, and that's what's so hard. We don't get to enjoy what the whole family worked for together." In his 2006 book, Junior, Macaulay Culkin wrote a letter to his dad that read in part, "Dear Father, it didn't have to be like this. We could have stayed poor. You showed me what it was like to be afraid. You hurt people a lot, you know. You made a lot of people cry. You made my mother cry." The picture wasn't much rosier when Macaulay told New York Magazine, "The one thing he taught me was how not to be, and how I don't want to be with my children. He was a bad guy." After Kit and Patricia Brentrup separated, she detailed his, quote, "reign of terror" in court affidavits, noting that he'd punched her while she was pregnant and given her bruises and black eyes. In general, the family was a lot happier when Kit was away. As Kieran Culkin recalled to Vanity Fair in 2018, sometime in the 90s, he went away and disappeared for 2-3 weeks, and the babysitter remarked to my mom, "You know what's funny is their father's been gone for 3 weeks, and not one of them has said, 'Hey, where's Dad?' Nobody cared, actually. My mom was the parent, so when he wasn't there, it was nicer and better." Kit Culkin was pushed toward child acting by his own stage mother, though his older sister, Bonnie Bedelia, reached a higher level of success. Once Kit had a family of his own, he needed money. His neighbor was a stage manager at the Ensemble Studio Theater who needed a child actor, and Macaulay was the right age and gender for the job, and he was essentially too young to say no.
He latched onto this thing with Macaulay and took it for all it was worth and became very possessive.
While filming The Good Son in 1993, a 12-year-old Macaulay decided that he needed a break. As he recalled to New York Magazine, "I just said to Kit, 'Listen, I'm really getting tired and I'm not at school as much as I'd like to be. I really need some time off.' He said, 'Yeah, sure,' and the next thing I knew, I was on the next set doing the next thing, and it just kind of clicked in my brain, okay, there's basically nothing I can do to make this stop." The following year, Macaulay decided to quit acting. Kit Culkin and Patricia Brentrup eventually separated after 20 years together. She brought a lawsuit against him for custody of their 7 children. He moved out of the family apartment but stayed in the building, renting a 1-bedroom apartment 9 floors above. Patricia ultimately received sole custody of their kids. Kit wasn't allowed visitation rights with his older children after the teenage Macaulay and Kieran indicated that they didn't want to see him. During the custody suit, Macaulay finally learned that his net worth was around $50 million. As he recalled to New York Magazine, "My father would hide newspapers from me so I wouldn't read the stuff about him or find out how much I was making. I can understand why they did that. They didn't want me running off to my friends saying, 'I just made $8 million.'" As for Kieran, he told the Irish Times in 2003, his main concern was that he could be our manager. He was okay with losing custody if he could still be our manager. Following his parents' custody battle, Macaulay Culkin decided to seek control of his own finances. He learned how to read court papers when he was just 14, and he sued to remove his parents as his legal guardians. His $17 million fortune was ultimately placed in the hands of a family accountant until he turned 18. As he explained to Esquire in 2020, "It's always misconstrued that I emancipated myself from my parents. In 2020, I legally took my parents' names off of my trust fund and found an executor, someone who would look over my finances, just in case anyone wanted to stick their pinky in the pie." Macaulay's parents had taken the standard 15% management fee out of his paychecks, receiving a total of $7.5 million over 4 years. But their financial situation took a nosedive once he retired from acting. Part of Macaulay's motivation for the lawsuit was to win the ability to withdraw money to buy a new apartment for his mother and siblings and to pay their school and legal fees. On December 23, 1998, a fire started in the Culkin family's 19th floor apartment in South Park Tower on Manhattan's Upper West Side. The blaze began when paper ignited near a space heater. As it grew, Patricia Brentrup evacuated the building with her children, but she allegedly left the door to her apartment open, thereby unleashing the fire into the hallway and stairwell. The flames took over the stairwell and killed 4 people on the floors above. Patricia was subsequently met with an $80 million negligence lawsuit. Macaulay Culkin wasn't living in the apartment building at the time, but he was implicated by the media and sued for $113,000, though the case against him was ultimately dismissed. Patricia and her children then moved into the apartment that Macaulay shared with his then-wife, Rachel Miner. As Macaulay recalled to New York Magazine, it was a nice Christmas other than the fact that all their presents got burned, and their house. It made me feel good that we brought it all together and made it work. It was awful, of course. People died. It was awful. In September 2004, then 24-year-old Macaulay Culkin was pulled over in Oklahoma City. He was accompanied by a 22-year-old friend from New York in the driver's seat, who was driving 70 miles per hour in a 60-mile-per-hour speed limit zone, and had also made an improper lane change. During the traffic stop, police officers searched the car and found a bag containing marijuana and $3,000 in cash. They also found a cigarette box full of rolled joints, making for 17 grams altogether. Macaulay reportedly produced an additional bag of medication from his pocket, which contained 16 milligrams of prescription drugs intended to treat anxiety and seizures. He was arrested for possession of a controlled dangerous substance without a valid prescription and possession of marijuana, and briefly held in the Oklahoma County Jail. He was ultimately released once he paid his $4,000 bail. When Macaulay Culkin was just 9 years old, he got a call from pop star Michael Jackson, who invited the Culkin family to visit his California estate, Neverland Ranch. Neverland was every child's dream. It featured a private zoo, a Ferris wheel, a movie theater, a carousel, and go-karts. Macaulay began spending all of his vacations there and built a friendship with Jackson based on a shared understanding of childhood fame, Arrested Development, and pushy stage fathers who grew abusive. As Macaulay explained to New York Magazine, "We had very similar experiences in childhood. It's not like I can just bump into people on the street and say, 'Oh, you too?' It doesn't happen that often. Michael's still a kid. I'm still a kid. We're both going to be about 8 years old forever in some place because we never had a chance to be 8 when we actually were. That's kind of the beautiful and the cursed part of our lives."
I was a peerless person. I was like nobody else in my Catholic school even had this much idea of what I was going through.
Following the 1993 child molestation case raised against Jackson, Macaulay expressed regret at never speaking up and defending his friend. He got his chance during Jackson's 2005 trial. On the stand, he confirmed that he and his siblings would often sleep in the same bed with Jackson, but fully clothed with the door unlocked and their parents on site. He vehemently denied allegations from Neverland staff that Jackson had touched him inappropriately. In 2000, Kit Culkin's 30-year-old daughter, Jennifer Adamson, died of a drug overdose. That wouldn't be the last tragic death that would befall the Culkin family. On December 9, 2008, 29-year-old Dakota Culkin was crossing Lincoln Boulevard in front of Brennan's Irish Pub in Marina del Rey, California, when she was fatally hit by a car. Following Dakota's death, a grief-stricken Kieran Culkin gave up his role in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, although he eventually got another chance to take the part. But before accepting, he warned director Edgar Wright that he dyed his hair green and gained weight from all the alcohol he'd been drinking since his sister's death. As Kieran recalled to The Hollywood Reporter in 2021, she was the funniest person in the family for sure and had a really dark sense of humor. Her death is the worst thing that's ever happened, and there's no sugarcoating that one. Each one of us handled it very differently. I think everyone was just torn up inside. It's always going to be devastating. I still weep about it out of nowhere. Following the trial in which Macaulay Culkin sought control of his finances in the mid-90s, Kit Culkin basically disappeared. But first, he stole all of Macaulay's movie memorabilia, including costumes and photos. As Macaulay explained to The Guardian in 2000, What happened was that my father just was not around one day. He just upped and left without explaining himself to anyone. By disappearing, Kit was essentially walking out of Macaulay's life forever. During an interview with Larry King in 2004, Macaulay admitted, "I don't really have any desire to see him. People are like, oh, isn't it sad that you don't see your father anymore? And it's like, he's the only father I knew, and he wasn't like taking us to, baseball games or anything like that." By 2001, Kit was broke and living in a 2-bedroom condo in Arizona with his new partner, who told New York Magazine that he would sometimes shut himself in a room to watch his kids' movies. In 2014, he reportedly traveled to see Kieran in the Broadway play This Is Our Youth. It was the first time they'd seen each other in 17 years, and they reportedly haven't spoken since. In 2021, Kieran told The Hollywood Reporter, "Kim, I don't care."
I thought about you.
As for Kit, when he was asked about Macaulay by the Daily Mail in 2016, he responded, "I don't consider him a son anymore." If you or someone you know may be the victim of child abuse, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD. That's 1-800-422-4453. Or contact their live chat services.
Comedian Pete Davidson has made quite a name for himself, but in his path to stardom on Saturday Night Live and the big screen, he's had to overcome many obstacles, like mental health issues and the loss of his father. This is his tragic real-life story. One of the biggest tragedies in Pete Davidson's life happened when he was only 7 years old. During the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, his firefighter father Scott lost his life while rescuing people trapped at the Marriott World Trade Center Hotel. After he made his way into the building, the tower where the hotel was located soon collapsed after it was hit by the second hijacked plane. Losing his father at such a young age was extremely traumatic for Davidson, who sought help from mental health professionals. Scott Davidson reportedly had a terrific sense of humor just like his son. He was only 33 years old when he died that day. In 2014, Pete memorialized his dad by tweeting, "Can't believe it's been 13 years. Feels like it was just yesterday. Words can't express how much I miss you."
He's a very good dude, and I have a lot of jokes about it, and if you don't like the first one, you probably won't like the rest.
After losing his father, Davidson found it tough to confront his demons and deal with everything he was going through. While growing up, he was prone to releasing his emotions in unusual ways. As his mother Amy told the New York Times in 2015, it was sad how sad he was growing up. One time in school, Davidson pulled out all his hair in frustration, and as he told the Times, in many ways he became a, quote, lab rat for physicians who were trying to understand the experiences of the children of victims of the terror attacks. As he told the Times, it was overwhelming. Davidson wasn't spared by his classmates as he experienced bullying from them. In a 2016 interview with radio DJ Peter Rosenberg, he revealed that he had just one friend whom he could trust in high school, while many other kids weren't very nice to him. As he put it, "I was in school having a rough time grieving, so I was acting out a little bit. I didn't have any friends." Davidson was drawn to comedy from a young age. In fact, he was still a teenager when he performed for the first time. At the age of 16, he took to the stage at the Looney Bin Comedy Club in his native Staten Island. He was a little awkward and a bit unsure of himself, but he nevertheless went ahead and put on an impressive act, delivering the most unusual lines without batting an eyelid. For example, he cracked a joke about being attracted to cougars with the punchline, "I think 21-year-olds are so hot." His act back then is a lot like his act now, as he prefers to just be himself. As he explained to The Ringer in 2020, "I don't know how to act or write characters or do impressions." For Davidson, comedy clubs felt like a safe haven where he could finally blend in and feel at ease. It also helped that he had the support of his mom, who would take him to his stand-up gigs. As she told the New York Times in 2015, "He had a tough time growing up without a dad. I wanted him to be happy, and this made him really, really happy." Ever since his teenage years, Davidson has been battling a chronic illness. He was first diagnosed with Crohn's disease when he was around 17 or 18, but he's learned to live with it. He received medical assistance and whatever he needed from his doctors, but the only thing that seemed to work for him was marijuana. In a 2016 interview with High Times, he revealed, "My stomach would just be in pain all day and I wouldn't be able to eat. And then I'd smoke. I'd be able to eat and be able to do my shows."
I wouldn't be able to do SNL if I didn't smoke weed. I wouldn't be able to do anything, really.
Crohn's disease is a chronic ailment that can result in inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract. Symptoms include such unpleasant experiences as constipation, cramps, diarrhea, and rectal bleeding. Despite living with Crohn's for years, Davidson hasn't let the illness bring him down, and he's also had the support of his loved ones. When he got bullied for dark circles under his eyes, which can be a symptom of Crohn's, his then-girlfriend Ariana Grande shot back at haters by tweeting, "You all do know this man has an autoimmune disease, right?" While marijuana has helped Davidson deal with his medical troubles, it's also had a negative impact, as he found himself becoming addicted to the point that he's had to check himself into rehab. He's never shied away from speaking about this particular aspect of his journey. In 2017, he opened up about beating addiction by writing on Instagram, "I quit drugs and I'm happy and sober for the first time in 8 years. It wasn't easy, but I got a great girl, great friends, and I consider myself a lucky man." Davidson has also been open about this part of his life while performing on SNL. During an appearance on Weekend Update, December 2019, he quipped, "I'm going on a little vacation. You know, the kind of vacation where insurance pays for some of it and they take your phone and shoelaces, and you have roommates, but it still costs like $100 grand.
I hope you know, Pete, that a lot of people really care about you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And in addition to helping Davidson with his drug use, rehab also proved to be beneficial for his mental health. In addition to all his other struggles, Davidson is also living with borderline personality disorder, a mental illness that manifests in a pattern of unstable relationships, a distorted sense of oneself, and a tendency towards strong emotional reactions. He was diagnosed with BPD in 2017. Around that time, he took to Instagram to write at length about how his behavior led to others lashing out at him. As he put it, "I've been getting online bullied and in public by people for 9 months. I've spoken about BPD and being suicidal publicly only in the hopes that it will help bring awareness and help kids like myself who don't want to be on this earth. I just want you guys to know." He added, "No matter how hard the internet or anyone tries to make me kill myself, I won't. I'm upset I even have to say this. To all those holding me down and seeing this for what it is, I see you and I love you." Mental health experts praised Davidson for choosing to go public with his diagnosis. For example, Sophie Lazarus, an assistant professor of psychiatry at Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, noted that it could go a long way in helping to take away the stigma attached to the illness. As she told Today, "Someone who thinks they are untreatable or overly emotional or damaged might see this and look up what the symptoms are and seek treatment." When it comes to Pete Davidson's love life, things have been rocky to say the least. He was dating Ariana Grande for a little while, and they hit it off so well that they even ended up getting engaged in June 2018. But it didn't work out as they split up in October of that year. As a source close to Grande told People magazine, "It was way too much too soon. It's not shocking to anyone." Davidson was majorly impacted by the breakup, and he even deleted his social media accounts in the wake of the split. The timing was especially difficult, as about a month earlier, Grande's ex-boyfriend Mac Miller had passed away from a drug overdose. Before his relationship with Grande, Davidson was linked from 2016 to 2018 to Cassie David, daughter of comedian Larry David. He began dating Grande just days after the breakup. In Cassie's 2020 essay collection, No One Asked for This, she revealed that when she found out that Davidson had decided to conceal his tattoos that were dedicated to her after they broke up, she felt distraught and worried. As she described it, "I felt like I was being terrorized." In 2020, it was rumored that Davidson was in a relationship with model Kaya Gerber, although they ultimately ended up splitting as well. In December 2018, soon after his breakup with Ariana Grande, Davidson scared his family and friends when he took to Instagram to share a message that was highly unsettling. As he wrote, "I really don't want to be on this earth anymore. I'm doing my best to stay here for you, but I actually don't know how much longer I can last. All I've ever tried to do was help people. Just remember I told you so." After posting this message, Davidson deleted his account, but plenty of people were quick to react. The New York Police Department went to check in on him and made sure that he was safe. His message received comments from fans offering him support. Unfortunately, a few were less than supportive as they encouraged him to take his own life. But he also received support from famous friends, with rapper Kid Cudi tweeting, "Thinking about you, Pete. Hit me back, bro." Thankfully, nothing irreversibly tragic happened, and he actually appeared on Saturday Night Live later that day. This may have been the most public case of Davidson struggling with thoughts about killing himself, but it wasn't the first. As he revealed in a 2018 interview with Variety, he once tried to drown himself in a pool when he was in the 4th or 5th grade. Davidson has a significant number of tattoos, and they've served as a sort of therapy for him. He's used them to reclaim his voice, express himself, and cover up the scars he has from self-harm, as he would often hurt himself by cutting to deal with his emotions. During a 2020 interview with Charlemagne the God, he discussed how he knew that he needed to get professional help. He revealed that he knows things are going south when he ends up cutting himself and things feel a little too unbearable, or even when his loved ones come up to him and say something like, "Hey, we're all worried, so you should go get help." Davidson also noted that he has a good circle of friends and loved ones who care about him and his mental health. One of his tattoos serves as a tribute to family, as his left arm bears the digits 8418, which were his father's firefighter badge number. One of the most surprising and sad revelations is that Pete Davidson has felt bullied during his time on Saturday Night Live. In his 2020 interview with Charlemagne the God, he got candid by confessing that he hasn't always been fully aware of what was happening on the show. He explained that while he felt extremely excited about the gig at first, he realized that he was eventually often being targeted in the jokes and some of the sketches. As he put it, "I have a weird feeling in that building where I don't know whose team they're playing for, really. If I'm the joke or I'm in on the joke."
I don't think I'm very well perceived. I don't think.
Indeed, there have been multiple SNL sketches in which Davidson has been playing parts that are less than flattering or a little too close for comfort. There's the dim bulb Chad, and then there are all the times on Weekend Update when he's opened up about morbid and private details of his own life. Essentially, Davidson wasn't sure whether he was really being respected on the show, and he's even considered leaving the cast for good. As he put it, "If I'm just fodder now though, maybe I just shouldn't be there. They think I'm f***ing dumb, like I'm literally painted out to be this big dumb idiot." If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, 8255.
Al Pacino is one of the most acclaimed actors in cinematic history, but he didn't have an easy climb to fame. His tragic, real-life story includes a tough family life, a struggle with his craft, and even a temporary departure from acting. Pacino's early years were no walk in the park. He was born in New York City in 1940 and never got to enjoy a happy and steady two-parent home life, as his parents separated when he was just 2. In a 2015 interview with The Guardian, he mentioned that his school teachers felt that he needed a father figure in his life, as his own dad wasn't an active presence at that point. As Pacino described it, "I wasn't an out-of-control teenager, but I was close." When Pacino was growing up, he was surrounded by his mom, his sister, and his grandparents. Even though they weren't well off financially, he still felt lucky and got a chance to experience a life of adventure. As he told Interview magazine, "It was tough for me growing up, I will say. But pretty much my grandmother, she ruled, and my mother was second. They were relatively young. My mother had me young. I owe a lot to that period in my life. I owe a lot to those women and my grandfather." Pacino has always felt indebted to his family for taking care of him in those turbulent times and helping him become the person he was meant to be. Pacino has also always been fascinated by the arts from a young age. He would often take to performing wherever he was, even on the streets. In fact, in his neighborhood, he was known by the nickname of The Actor. As he told The New Yorker in 2014, "We'd act out parts from joke books and comic books. Kids make videos today, but it was kind of an unusual thing then to get street urchins to join you in acting out comics. Of course, it never got off the ground. There's a comedy in there somewhere." According to his old neighbor Ken Lipper, Pacino was full of drama. Furthermore, he wasn't afraid to warm up to play different characters and would often experiment out in public. He was also handsome. His looks and talent both got him noticed early on as girls in the neighborhood admired him, calling him Sonny Pacino, the lover Bambino. On top of all that, he was also witty, and he would use his acting skills to befriend other kids and confuse bullies, something that definitely worked to his advantage. It was almost like he was destined to become an acting legend.
I had this ability to mimic. I would mimic the movies, I would mimic any of the current singers.
Pacino was intrigued enough by the arts to take a drama class when he was in junior high. While helping his mom Rose run the house, he also got a chance to attend the High School of Performing Arts in Manhattan. This was something his mother struggled to come to terms with. Simply put, she wasn't pleased, as she told her son, "Acting isn't for our kind of people. Poor people don't go into this." Nevertheless, Pacino wasn't discouraged, as he was determined to succeed and believed that he was a survivor. As he told The New Yorker, "Survivors only hear what they want to hear." He did experience a setback though, when his stint at the high school turned out to be a short one because the non-acting subjects were more rigorous than he had anticipated. Spanish class, for instance, was actually held in Spanish. The style of teaching didn't appeal to him either. He was too young for it, so he dropped out at the age of 16. But he didn't give up on his future, and he started focusing on auditioning and working on his craft. When he was a struggling actor, Pacino didn't have a lot of money or connections, but he was resilient enough to get through the tough times. As he explained to The Guardian, "There were times when I was young when I could have used money. After college, I was often unemployed, and at one time I slept in a storefront for a few days. But I've never been materialistic, except that I am, of course, because my lifestyle makes me a spender. It also helped that Pacino truly loved what he was learning. He would read voraciously and meet all kinds of characters on the streets of downtown New York. It was also fortunate that he was young and that poverty didn't seem like that big of a deal at that point in his life. He could survive it with his youth and with the age-old street slice of pizza. As he told Interview magazine, "You just have yourself to deal with. A piece of pizza goes a long way. You could live on anything at that age. It doesn't matter. You extract every bit of that piece of pizza." His enthusiasm for acting didn't fade in the least, and he continued working on it as he learned to survive in the real world. Pacino lived through loss at an early age. He was just 21 and struggling through his early acting days when his 43-year-old mother passed away. It was a huge blow for someone who'd grown up around mostly strong maternal figures, and he wasn't sure how to deal with it. Before he could truly comprehend this loss, his grandfather James passed away the following year. By 1962, he found himself struggling to make sense of it all. It was an incredibly difficult time for him, indeed one of the worst periods he's ever lived through. As he told The New Yorker, "And I had no father. I think that was my darkest period. I felt lost." Despite what he was going through, Pacino didn't give up on his dream as he learned to navigate uncharted territory and cope with loss. He continued looking for work, getting through rejections, and doing his best to try and land good roles.
It's tough getting through life. You got to be tough, I guess. We're all tough.
When Pacino was 23, he benefited from joining the Actors Studio, where he evolved as an actor and polished his skills under the guidance of studio director Lee Strasberg. But Pacino knew he wasn't like his contemporaries, who came from privileged backgrounds. He felt inadequate and different because of that. As he told The Telegraph in 2015, "I knew I was this vagabond kid." Pacino realized that as an Italian-American, he didn't look like his fellow actors at the auditions he went to. He felt like an outcast, but he didn't let that bring him down, as he knew he needed to be patient for the right gig to come along. But he nevertheless found himself struggling and filled with self-doubt at times. When he started working on the play Creditors alongside actors who'd received classical training, he worried he couldn't go through with it and wanted to leave the show. Luckily for him, director Charlie Lawton was there to quell his fears and doubts. Sticking with the hard material of Creditors proved to be so transformative for Pacino that an image of him in the play still sits on his mantelpiece. Pacino wasn't always lucky. To get into Broadway and the movies, he had to work hard, and it took quite a bit of time before he got opportunities that paid off. Even being a part of productions was taxing for him at times, especially as he worried about connecting with his audience. For example, while performing in his off Broadway debut, he found himself tearing up during the intermission, convinced that the performance wasn't working. Charlie Lawton counseled him through it, and he decided to go back to his performance. As Pacino recalled to The New Yorker, "It was a very important moment for me. I went back in there and finished the run." Before Broadway, getting to the point where Pacino could bag roles meant milking every opportunity that came along. He would put up plays in cafes with his peers and focus on making the most of what he had. As he told Inquirer.net in 2020, "We passed the hat around after each performance. Somebody would drop in coins here and there. That's how we ate, and it was right in New York City." He added that the experiences he lived through helped him to hone his creativity and understand the importance of cultivating the desire to grow and do new things. Pacino has often turned to alcohol to cope with his struggles. In fact, he had his first drink when he was just a teen. Being the method actor that he is, he found himself feeling overwhelmed after his performances and felt the need to reward himself. He liked the way alcohol made him feel, but it eventually started getting in the way of his relationships. When he was dating fellow actor Jill Clayburgh and had one of his binges, he was barely able to focus on anything around him. She told him that she was lonesome, but he was too drunk to hear it. Pacino wasn't able to kick his addiction for a long time, but his loved ones eventually knew that it could no longer be avoided. In 1977, he finally acknowledged his drinking problem thanks to his friends and made a decision to get sober. In the biography Al Pacino, A Life on the Wire, he's quoted as saying, "My friends finally made me realize that drinking was an addiction. After each show, I felt entitled to a reward, but now it's ice cream and Oreo cookies."
How did you defeat alcoholism?
Well, I didn't defeat it. One doesn't look at it that way.
How long are you sober?
All I could say is I'm never sober.
It's safe to say that Al Pacino played one of the most iconic roles in cinema as Michael Corleone in the Godfather trilogy, but he almost didn't land the part. In fact, other actors such as Robert Redford, Warren Beatty, Jack Nicholson, and Ryan O'Neal were being considered for the role. Luckily for Pacino, though, Mario Puzo, who wrote the Godfather novel, was keen to listen to director Francis Ford Coppola, who was set on casting Pacino. However, Pacino still almost lost the part when he showed up hungover at the screen test without having learned his lines. It took him 3 attempts to deliver his dialogue, and he was left feeling agitated after the experience. A bit of back and forth ensued, and Pacino was finally offered the part. There was still one snag, though, as it conflicted with another role he'd agreed to do a few months earlier. He had to lobby hard and pull a few strings to get out of this sticky situation. After he finally landed the role, for which he earned a flat fee of $35,000, he spent time thinking about how to do it justice. As he explained to The New Yorker, "I didn't see Michael as a gangster. I saw his struggle as something that was connected to his intelligence, that innate sense of what's around and being able to adjust to things."
This wasn't enough time, Michael. Wasn't enough time. We'll get there, Pop. We'll get there.
Al Pacino may be an iconic film legend, but he's clearly witnessed his share of highs and lows during his career. For example, his 1985 film Revolution was a much anticipated project that ended up flopping. He later said of the movie, "Nobody saw this film, but we love it and we hung in for the next 20 years and changed this movie a little." Revolution's failure was a major letdown and something that affected Pacino on a personal level. Afterwards, he decided to step away from films for 4 years, as he needed to take a break and reflect. But eventually, he had to return because he was going broke, and his then-girlfriend, Diane Keaton, pushed him to get back out there with the 1989 thriller Sea of Love. Amidst all the struggles, Pacino's passion for acting has never subsided. He believes that if the passion is still there, a person should keep doing what they've been doing. As he told The Guardian in 2015, "I believe I have reached my stride, which is why I persist. As long as you have passion for the art, keep working, because age catches up with you."
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Iconic actor Michael Landon was a star, popular for his roles on Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, and Highway to Heaven. However, there was a lot more to his life than most people knew. This is the life and tragic death of Michael Landon. Michael Landon was born Eugene Maurice Orowitz to Jewish and Catholic parents in 1936. His dad struggled as a movie publicist, while his mom was an actress who harbored thoughts of killing herself. Landon's parents constantly fought with each other. Crumbling under the pressure, Landon used to wet his bed, and his mom would humiliate him by hanging the bedsheet to dry outside. In her book, I Promised My Dad, Landon's daughter, Cheryl, wrote that her father's difficult childhood experiences made him decide early on that he would never follow in his parents' footsteps. According to Cheryl, the young Landon vowed to live his life differently as an adult. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255. Michael Landon's beginnings were full of tough moments. He was often bullied by his classmates for being half Jewish.
I was a Jewish kid in a town with only a couple of them.
He was thin and angry as a child. Additionally, his mother bullied him and his dad at home. Landon's daughter, Cheryl, described how exhausting life was for the family in I Promised My Dad, writing, "Landon's mother bullied everyone, including her husband. Dad felt his father shouldn't have allowed such things to happen. Landon believed that it was a bit too much for his father, who eventually grew weary of it all. Cheryl wrote that Landon spent a lot of time by himself. He'd often fantasize about building an identity for himself, away from his current reality. Later in his life, in the 1950s, he faced immense disappointment when his dad tried to get him a gig in Los Angeles through his connections at RKO Radio Pictures. It was an embarrassing moment for the father-son duo, as Landon's dad couldn't even get onto the property because of a steadfast security guard. Landon decided at that point to make sure that he was independent, never having to answer to anyone. Despite encountering several obstacles early in his life, Michael Landon was undoubtedly talented and discovered that quickly. He was an excellent javelin thrower. Landon's low grades didn't stop him from excelling, and he scored an athletic scholarship from the University of Southern California after graduating from high school. He was at the university for a year, during which he worked on his skills and also supported himself by holding down odd jobs. As his daughter Cheryl described in I Promised My Dad, Landon was determined and had always been fascinated by acting. While harboring dreams of competing in the Olympics, he also decided to be a part of his university's speech and drama department. Unfortunately, more bullying followed at the university, and Landon sustained a serious injury on the field. Unable to cope as his athletic performance suffered, he decided to take a break and rebuild. Landon continued to make a living through odd jobs and focused on getting by, even working as a babysitter at one point and eventually working in a soup factory, followed by a ribbon factory. He was determined to excel, no matter what he was doing. While it's true that Michael Landon enjoyed acting, he didn't plan on pursuing it professionally. Nevertheless, he found himself doing exactly that through a series of unexpected events. As the story goes, while Landon was working at the ribbon factory, a colleague asked him to assist him with an audition for Warner Brothers. Landon was happy to help and found himself enjoying the acting process. He still needed to make ends meet and decided to take a job at a gas station near the Warner Brothers studios. He hoped that being close to the studio would help him in terms of networking. It did. He was spotted by an executive who motivated him to sign up for acting classes. He continued supporting himself through random work gigs as he made his way through acting school, determined to see it through. He changed his name to Michael Landon, choosing the name from a phone book, and broke into the acting scene in the mid-1950s. Landon wasn't an overnight success, though, and worked hard to get parts, auditioning wherever he could and doing small roles until he got his first real break. Michael Landon's first major break was a 1957 horror film called I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which helped him get noticed. The movie was unconventional, and Landon went all out in his role as a teenager who was troubled and had a hard time coping as things escalated around him, much like his own life. After I Was a Teenage Werewolf, things started looking up a bit for Landon. He pursued several roles in movies like High School Confidential, The Legend of Tom Dooley, and God's Little Acre. Things took off for Michael Landon in 1959 when he was hired to play Little Joe in Bonanza. Just 22 years old at the start, he was Little Joe for a long time on screen, 14 years to be precise, and he was loved for his portrayal of the ideal son in a ranch-like setting in Nevada. Bonanza was the first TV Western to be broadcast in color and wasn't initially expected to be such a raging hit. It really took off after NBC started showcasing it to audiences over the weekends, and by 1964, it was ruling viewers' hearts. The show enjoyed a loyal fan following and maintained its popularity for years until it concluded in 1973. Without a doubt, Bonanza made Landon a force to be reckoned with, paved the way for his robust acting career, and helped him find his niche and identity in the cutthroat entertainment industry. While Michael Landon was busy working on his career and trying to make a name for himself as an actor, he suffered a major setback in 1959. His father was accustomed to a routine that he usually followed: grab a lunch next to a theater he was managing and sample the soup of the day every time he dropped by. One day, though, he said the soup was good, as usual, right before suffering a major heart attack. According to his daughter, Cheryl, Landon was shaken by his father's unexpected passing and mourned his loss. He also started to believe that his fate would be similar, that he'd go early because of a heart attack. Landon took care of his father's funeral costs and also ensured that he was looking out for his mother's and sister's financial needs throughout his life. Losing his father left him shaken for days, and he had a hard time when he got back on set while filming The Legend of Tom Dooley. He was still grieving and learning to live with his loss. Later in his career, Michael Landon wished to take control and oversee his work, an aspect of his personality that irritated many co-workers. When Landon turned to directing a few episodes of Bonanza and even writing them, he was his own worst critic and believed that some of the episodes weren't as good as what they'd already done. Additionally, because he was always chasing perfection, he ended up having a few disagreements with those he worked with. Bonanza's executive producer once remarked, "Landon would challenge nearly every line, every scene, every setup in other writers' scripts." It got increasingly bitter toward the end. Landon was labeled as arrogant and stubborn at times, but he said that he didn't want to blame others for his mistakes and would rather take responsibility in case an episode didn't work as expected. Unfortunately for Michael Landon, his personal life, particularly in terms of romance, wasn't perfect. He was married 3 times as he navigated rocky relationships. As aptly described by People, Landon was often depicted as a family man on one of his most popular shows, Little House on the Prairie, but his reality was different. The failure of his first marriage can be chalked up to being too young. However, Landon was truly upset when people thought he left his second wife for a younger woman, later reflecting, "You don't dissolve a relationship to go to bed with someone 20 years younger. You have to have major differences and a deep-rooted need to stop a relationship after as many years as I was married." Landon found domestic bliss with the lady he had the affair with, Cindy Clerico, who was a makeup artist at the time. In fact, Landon was so committed to continuing his family and making up for everything he'd lost in his early years that he had his vasectomy reversed after he married Cindy.
It's the first time I've really taken a great deal of time off, and I'm enjoying it. Doing a little more vacationing than usual with my kids and spending more time with the kids.
Melissa Gilbert was one of Michael Landon's co-stars on Little House on the Prairie. Gilbert looked up to Landon, revealing, "Our relationship was very close, and it grew even deeper when my father passed away in 1976. Our families got close. We went on vacation to Hawaii together every Easter. His son Mike Jr. was my prom date." Unfortunately, their relationship suffered a setback when it was discovered that Landon was having an affair with Cindy. Gilbert was heartbroken. In I Promised My Dad, Cheryl wrote that Gilbert was as surprised as Landon's own family was when details of the affair came out. Cheryl added that Gilbert had publicly commented that Landon leaving his wife for someone younger proved that he was far from perfect. The affair had a detrimental effect on Gilbert's relationship with Landon. She stayed polite but wasn't as friendly with Landon as she used to be, and they didn't communicate for a long time after the show ended. Gilbert wouldn't speak to Landon again until 1990. Despite their long period of friction, Gilbert remembered her on-screen father with fondness later in life, saying in 2009, "He was an amazing man, an amazing talent, an incredible director, actor, writer, a great boss, an incredible human being." Michael Landon's life was irrevocably changed when he received a cancer diagnosis in April 1991, though he remained strong and wasn't scared of dying. In an interview with Life magazine, Landon commented about his battle with the disease, saying, "Look, there's 2 things that can happen. I can win or I can lose, and I can handle both." After being diagnosed, Landon devoted a lot of his time to his family while focusing on treatment options like chemotherapy and experimental treatments.
I think every moment just gets a little more important after something like this.
Landon stated that he wouldn't simply lose hope and would fight back. He also said that he had faith in God and family and that he wasn't scared of death. In I Promised My Dad, Cheryl reflected on one of her biggest regrets, the fact that her father spent much of his final weeks not seeing his children because of miscommunication between her and Cindy. The latter told Cheryl and her siblings that Landon could only see them on the weekends, which was far from the truth. Cheryl wrote that she felt deep pain and regret when she found out the truth and feared that Landon may have misunderstood why his kids didn't spend more time with him. Michael Landon may not have been afraid of death, but when he passed away at the age of 54 in July 1991, he left many fans heartbroken. When he passed, former President Ronald Reagan remembered him, saying, "His tragic battle with cancer touched the hearts of every American, as did his indomitable spirit." Landon's funeral was a private affair that had 500 attendees at a memorial park in Los Angeles. Melissa Gilbert paid tribute to Landon, saying, "He was so special and so basically good. With him, you always knew exactly where you stood. The man had integrity. Many years after his passing, Landon's legacy has stayed thanks to his contribution to American TV shows. Despite the tragic nature of his death, Landon remained upbeat until the very end and felt he hadn't missed out on much in his life, saying, "I've had a pretty good lick here." Beginning with his role in Dazed and Confused, and eventually starring in Oscar-winning films like Dallas Buyers Club, Matthew McConaughey has had an interesting and successful career in Hollywood. Here are some of the formative experiences that shaped who the actor is today. Matthew McConaughey was born in November 1969 in Texas. It didn't take him long to develop his rugged good looks, as he earned an actual award in school titled Most Handsome Student. However, life at home wasn't exactly smooth for the young actor. In an interview with Today, he revealed that he was often physically abused by his father and mother. He didn't think much of it at the time and said, "I was scared at the moment, but even then and immediately after that, I didn't ever question the love that mom and dad had or the love that they gave us." He added that as a parent himself, his approach is different compared to his parents, being that he and his wife focus on communication rather than punishment. However, he did go on to say that he still doesn't believe his parents did anything wrong, and that the violence he sometimes suffered was earned. In his memoir, Green Lights, McConaughey highlighted some rough times that he had after high school during his time in an exchange program in Australia. CBS Austin reported that things weren't exactly the way he expected them to be, and he had to find a way to get through a difficult year. "I was with a very odd family in the middle of the country in nowhere, Australia, so my visions of beaches and Elle Macpherson were never realized. Let me just put it that way." He didn't have friends or a steady-paying job. He didn't even have a phone to get in touch with his loved ones and had to depend on himself. He went on to say, "I would not be where I am today with the life I had if I did not have that year, that very tough year that I had in Australia." In Green Lights, Matthew McConaughey touches on various traumatic experiences. He writes that his first brush with sex wasn't pleasant and that he was essentially forced into it. He explains that he was 15 years old when it happened, and it was a case of blackmail. "I was certain I was going to hell for the premarital sex. Today, I am merely certain that I hope that's not the case." He also added that he faced abuse later on in his life, when he was attacked by an older man at the age of 18. Despite these experiences, though, he's never felt like a victim. Ending on a positive note, he writes, "I have a lot of proof that the world is conspiring to make me happy." Fame had a major downside for Matthew McConaughey and his relationship with his mother, Kay. As reported by People, after show business took over the actor's life, she was dazzled by her son's newfound fame. He explained that after becoming a celebrity, even something as simple as his regular weekly calls with his mother were affected. He said, "Mother wasn't answering the phone. A fan of my fame was answering the phone." As McConaughey's fame grew, so did his mother's tendency to become overzealous and share his personal information with the press. He said, "I was trying to find my own balance with fame and stuff, and I would share things with her. Some of those things I would share might show up in the 6 o'clock news 3 days later." This caused a rift between the two, and McConaughey was estranged from his mother for 8 years. They eventually worked things out and started speaking again, but it took the actor a long time to get over what happened. Even though Matthew McConaughey has achieved a considerable amount of success, he's always felt like he could do better, as highlighted by The Guardian in 2018. The actor always believed that the dreams he's had have been better than reality itself. He said, "I've never done a film that's lived up to what I imagined it could be." It's clear that McConaughey doesn't mind being hard on himself. He implied that though he's been lucky enough to play many roles throughout the years, he's yet to find anything that has made him feel extraordinary. And he doesn't think he'll ever find that special film or part.
It'd be a lot cooler if you did.
Matthew McConaughey has been controversial at times. For example, one of his most scandalous incidents is his 1999 arrest, which he explores in Green Lights. According to him, he had decided to get naked and high and listen to music in the middle of the night with the windows open. This didn't go down well with the cops in Austin, who broke into his home, handcuffed him, and told him that he was being arrested for disturbing the peace, possession of marijuana, and resisting arrest. He was displeased and refused to put his clothes back on. According to him, this was his way of showing that he wasn't wrong and was minding his own business when they entered his home. He later got away with a fine amounting to $50 and plenty of publicity. Matthew McConaughey surprised everyone in the early 2000s when he decided to take a sabbatical, or what was called the McConaissance. He purposely left the public eye for 20 long months because he knew he was being stereotyped, and specifically being cast only in romantic comedies, which he wasn't happy about. He said, "What happened was I was the rom-com guy. I was the shirtless guy on the beach. That was fine. Yes, I said it then and I'll say it now. Those rom-coms I was in were paying for the house on the beach where I was shirtless." Guilty. He put in a great effort to get out of this rut, once even refusing a role that could have potentially given him $14.5 million. The sabbatical ultimately helped him mold his own image. He put it rather well when he said that being away meant that he could become a new good idea. His efforts were successful as he was soon considered for new, more diverse roles.
Yeah, you have to understand if my memory hadn't sharpened in the interim.
Despite being a promising actor, Matthew McConaughey didn't always get the roles he wanted. For example, according to Today, McConaughey was considered for the lead role in Titanic, but lost it to Leonardo DiCaprio. Kate Winslet once reflected upon her audition with him. "I auditioned with Matthew. Isn't that weird? Never said that in public before. I auditioned with Matthew, which was completely fantastic. It just wouldn't have been the whole Jack and Rose, Kate and Leo thing." He also had his heart set on playing the Hulk, but he never got the chance to fulfill his dream. As reported by the Huffington Post, he was rejected after vocalizing his interest in 2008's The Incredible Hulk, ultimately losing to Edward Norton. Matthew McConaughey received a huge blow when he found out that he'd lost his father, James Donald McConaughey, in 1992. He spoke to radio host Tim Ferriss about his loss and said that losing his father made him more open to risks as far as his acting was concerned, saying, "My dad being this sort of crutch, just because he was alive and above government and above law, was now gone. I had no crutch. I had no safety net all of a sudden." Losing his dad made him reflect on mortality. He realized that the things he previously loved and craved, such as acting and fame, were temporary, superficial things. This realization allowed him to take more risks and embrace change, as opposed to being indecisive and afraid of change. Also, as noted by Vanity Fair, McConaughey's parents had a torrid relationship, separating and remarrying many times over the course of their lives together. Eventually, they would always come back to each other. The actor reflected on what it was like hearing the news from his mom and said, "My knees buckled. I couldn't believe it. He was my dad. Nobody or nothing could kill him." If there is one thing that Matthew McConaughey does well, it's preparing for a role and going all out to make sure that he does his best. For example, while working on his role for the 2016 film Gold, he put himself through a lot of pain by putting on 45 pounds. He played businessman Kenny Wells and wanted to make sure that he looked the part. Unfortunately, the movie was a colossal failure, and the actor's hard work went down the drain. Not to mention the fact that he obviously required months of intensive exercise to lose all that extra fat. In fact, McConaughey said that he was still trying to lose weight in 2019, telling Red Magazine, "It's been a while. I needed to get in shape. I wanted to. I was 220 pounds in Gold, of which I still have a couple of things back there on my back." McConaughey, according to The Guardian, also shaved his head for the film. The reviews were terrible, and no awards came his way. He did manage to impress viewers with his performance in the 2013 film Dallas Buyers Club, for which he shed 50 pounds or so. Despite winning several awards for his roles over the years, including an Oscar, he's not been able to consistently achieve success at the box office. Though he has acted in many blockbuster films, such as Interstellar, White Boy Rick, Serenity, or The Gentleman, he's also played a part in numerous flops, such as Free State of Jones and The Sea of Trees. He reflects on these less celebrated performances in his memoir, Greenlights. "The box office failures didn't dampen my love of acting. If anything, they made me more feverishly committed to my craft. In my career now, I was more than an entertainer. I was an actor, an artist, and that satisfied me. My career was full."
Danny DeVito is without a doubt a national treasure that must be protected at all costs. It doesn't matter when you grew up, there's something he's been in that shaped your childhood. But despite the joy he's brought to millions, there's a lot of tragedy in his past. Danny DeVito was just 19 years old when he left his hometown of Asbury Park, New Jersey, and headed to New York City to try to make it as an actor. We all know that Danny DeVito did make it, but up until then, life hadn't been so great. Danny DeVito's mother was 40 when he was born, and she was already the mother of 2 teenage girls by the time he came along. According to Rolling Stone, she said of her youngest, quote, "I didn't want him, but I'm so proud of him." By the time he was a teenager, DeVito wanted out of the house. It wasn't just because heroin was turning his neighborhood into a scary place, it was because alcoholism was turning his home into an even more frightening one. "My father had a drinking problem and was sick in that way, and my father was a sweet man during the day, but as soon as he had a drink, he went off the deep end. I felt vulnerable." When Danny DeVito was just 14, he convinced his parents to send him away to a Catholic boarding school because of concerns that are very heavy for a young teenager. He told The Guardian that while his family was far from well off, there were plenty of others in the neighborhood who were even poorer, and he was seeing them go down the road that led to drugs and addiction. That, coupled with his father's alcohol abuse, he told Rolling Stone, was why he opted to get out of town and away from all the dangers while he could.
7 years as an altar boy. Did you whack the stuff? Did you go in the back and get the wine?
I never did that.
You never did that?
No.
That's what started me off.
At a glance, it's Danny DeVito's diminutive 4'10" height that makes him stand out in any role. He said to the Archive of American Television, "Well, every character I've ever played has been my size. I think it's an asset. I think it's kind of what you make it, in the way you are, the way you feel." At the same time, though, he went on to say that there were restrictions. It was difficult to be in films opposite tall actors and actresses, unless it's a film like Twins, where he played Arnold Schwarzenegger's twin brother. And that's okay for a pretty sad reason, he said, because that's the joke. The joke is that we're twins. He supposedly got all the good genes and I got the crappy ones. It turns out I got all the smart genes and he got the stupid ones.
Huh? Come again?
My name is Julius, and I'm your twin brother.
Danny DeVito isn't just short. According to Yahoo News, he is being diagnosed with Fairbanks disease, or multiple emphyseal dysplasia. It's a genetic condition that is characterized by short stature and can also lead to joint pain, arthritis, and misalignment of the hips, ankles, and knees. Danny DeVito has played a lot of despicable characters, but in real life, he's very in tune to the prejudice and abuse that others face, especially women. He told The Guardian that he credited growing up with and being close to his 2 older sisters, who he describes as really tough broads, for giving him a comfortable respect for women. "I'm very friendly with women. I feel comfortable around them. They were always in my house, my sisters, their girlfriends. I felt like I could sit down and talk to a woman." Danny DeVito also said that he's had numerous conversations about the Me Too movement and had this to say, "What I come away with is 4 words. Women must be heard. We're all suffragettes. We got to get women equal pay. We got to get them on the map. We got to respect them." Danny DeVito's father passed away in 1984, and in 2012, Danny wrote a moving tribute for Father's Day. He remembered that his dad had made the jump from owning a business to working from home, becoming a bookie who took bets on horse racing. For DeVito, it was incredible. "I loved it. I could see him whenever I wanted. If you have a father who wants to spend time with you, which mine did, then you're really fortunate. I owe a great deal to my father in terms of him always being there." He credits his father for teaching him to always be prepared no matter where he was going. He talks about, quote, "that rush of being with your dad, of going to the movies together, of going fishing." He said, "I still miss him. There's that emptiness that you have to take with you, but that's part of being human." Sadly, DeVito also adds that his father never got to meet his grandchildren. He passed away just after he saw his son get married. They may not have had the easiest relationship, but they clearly loved each other, and there's no expiration date on grief. In 2012, one of Hollywood's great long-lasting marriages came to an end. Rhea Perlman and Danny DeVito were done. There was a ton of speculation about the cause, and regardless of what went on behind closed doors, a 2013 interview with The Guardian showed just how broken up Danny was. Rhea and me, we're going okay. We're still good buddies. We talk all the time. We're okay." However, the interviewer then described DeVito as losing, quote, "a little of his pluck" and reaching out for a big, long hug. As of 2019, the couple was still separated, though not divorced.
Danny and I have always loved each other, and we have 3 amazing children together, and we really agree on almost everything important.
She went on to say to People, "It was a hard transition, but everything smoothed out. Everybody's got a good relationship with Danny and with me and each other. That's all we care about." And as for DeVito, he told People, quote, "We're friends. We're happy. Everybody's happy. Relationships are complicated, even the ones that seem like they'll last forever."
Corey Haim, star of such 80s films as The Lost Boys, battled addiction and the aftermath of child stardom for the better part of his life, which was sadly cut short in 2010. This is the tragic story of Corey Haim. Corey Ian Haim was born to Judy and Bernie Haim on December 23, 1971 in Toronto, Ontario. His family was from a modest background, and as a boy, Corey was shy and mostly kept to himself. Acting lessons were a way for the reticent Haim to open up a little more and feel more confident around others. As Haim tried to figure out where his interests lay, becoming involved with several activities including acting and sports, his parents went through a divorce. Seeing his parents' divorce was extremely difficult for Haim. What became obvious later was the fact that Haim's childhood was made more complicated by his status as a child actor. That meant he would face a number of traumatic incidents that shaped his future. Corey Haim wasn't keen on joining the acting industry. He was more intrigued by hockey than acting and wanted to pursue the sport professionally. However, when he witnessed his older sister trying her luck in auditions, he figured it wouldn't hurt to attempt acting himself. He quickly became a hit. Haim was undeniably charming in front of the camera, doing commercials when he was only 10 years old. Haim got his first major break on The Edison Twins, which was on the air from 1982 to 1986. The children's show revolved around child prodigies who embarked on adventures together, using science to overcome various challenges. The show would prove to be a launching pad for Haim, catapulting him to Hollywood superstardom. Haim's debut film, the thriller Firstborn, came to him when he was just 13 years old. However, things got off to a rough start when actor Peter Weller didn't react well to Haim praising him. Weller slammed the boy against a wall, and the two were separated only after 3 crew members stepped in to intervene. For Haim, this unexpected incident was very scary, and it took him some time to get over it. Weller did later apologize for what happened and said he was too caught up in method acting. Firstborn failed to impress audiences despite the fact that it had 2 major stars in the making, Sarah Jessica Parker and Robert Downey Jr. Nonetheless, Haim got back on his feet after the movie and continued to pursue acting, building his portfolio and working on several projects, including the 1985 comedy Murphy's Romance, where he worked with Sally Field. Haim had some minor roles in films like Secret Admirer before he took on a particularly complicated part, as well as his first leading role, when he portrayed a paraplegic boy in Silver Bullet. He also got noticed for his work in a made-for-TV film called A Time to Live. For the latter, he won widespread appreciation and a Young Artist of the Year award. In 1986, all this momentum culminated in Lucas, where he earned praise from critics and also won over young cinema-goers with his acting. Chicago Sun-Times movie critic Roger Ebert wrote, "Haim does not give one of those cute little boy performances that get on your nerves. He creates one of the most three-dimensional, complicated, interesting characters of any age in any recent movie." Ebert added that if the young Haim could live up to the potential he had already displayed, he'd get far in his acting career and wouldn't fade from public memory. Tragically, though, Lucas would turn out to be a defining experience for Haim for all the wrong reasons. In 2008, Haim revealed on an episode of his reality TV show The Two Coreys that he had been abused when he was 14. It was later alleged by both his mother and his friend and frequent co-star Corey Feldman that he was abused on the set of Lucas. Haim's mother told People that he kept the abuse secret for so long because he didn't want to be blamed for it. He said, "Mom, somebody hurt me. I don't need to hurt them back. I need to take this to my grave." Haim's mother later lamented the fact that her son became a part of showbiz too early. She implied that if he hadn't been an actor, he would have had a regular childhood, telling People, "Corey would have been in school in Toronto with his friends, playing hockey like he loved. It's not a good idea to put these young kids in these movies in Hollywood. Do it in the summertime. Let them go to school. Don't go to Hollywood." Despite the personal trauma, Haim continued moving forward with his career. Lucas was followed by one of his most important films, The Lost Boys, which earned him more love from audiences, even though critics weren't too impressed.
How are those maggots? Maggots, Michael. You're eating maggots. How do they taste?
This was also the film that saw Corey Feldman and Haim team up together. The pairing was enough of a hit for them to later be known as the Two Coreys. Throughout their careers, Feldman and Haim would ultimately collaborate on 10 films as well as a reality show together. As with many child stars, things became more difficult professionally for Corey Haim when he became an adult. The 1990s were a bad time for the actor, who struggled to stay relevant while also battling drug addiction. Haim's journey with substance abuse was a long one. He was said to have first tried drugs as well as booze when he was filming Lucas, and eventually struggled to control his addiction as he experimented with several kinds of drugs. During the 90s, he worked on a video game called Double Switch, among other smaller projects, but nothing seemed to help.
Maybe next time, sucker.
Haim was forced to declare bankruptcy in 1997. As the 2000s hit, the actor tried to rebuild his life and kick his drug habit. Unfortunately, he got hooked on prescription drugs. As Haim once explained, "I started on the downers, which were a hell of a lot better than the uppers because I was a nervous wreck. But 1 led to 2, 2 led to 4, 4 led to 8, until at the end it was about 85 a day. The doctors could not believe I was taking that much." It's not like Corey Haim didn't try to seriously deal with his addiction issues. He worked hard on getting clean, visiting rehab, and weaning himself off drugs. Sadly, he kept relapsing, caught up in a vicious cycle. He even made a film about himself titled Corey Haim, Me, Myself, and I in 1989. The actor was dealing with rumors about his addiction to drugs and wanted to reach out to his fans and talk about it all. At the time of the film's release, Haim had this to say to his worried fans: 10 years from now, I'm hopefully going to be in Tahiti or something, kicking back, like in my huge mansion. If everything goes right, it's all up to me. Sadly, Haim was constantly struggling, repeatedly going back to rehab. His addiction to prescription drugs caused him to put on a lot of weight, and he allegedly also suffered a stroke. Haim's mother tried to get her son back on track by asking him to move to Toronto and stay away from Hollywood. In 2004, a song called Whatever Happened to Corey Haim was released by The Thrills. Even though it wasn't directly connected to the actor, it got Haim's attention, and he said in response, quote, "I'm clean, sober, humble, and happy." According to Corey Feldman, he and Haim weren't treated well by others in the industry. Feldman said that the publicity in relation to their drug use was just an excuse to get them out of the limelight. In his later years, Corey Haim was alone a lot. Feldman had stopped speaking to Haim at that point because of the actor's issues with addiction. An unfortunate incident that involved Haim showing up to a set under the influence made Feldman conclude that it wasn't wise to have the actor interacting with his family. For his part, Haim shot back, saying in 2008, "I will always love Corey Feldman, but I lost 105% respect for him and his wife." In 2010, a neighbor told CNN that while Haim was perhaps looking healthier, he seemed to be lonesome. He said he occasionally spotted the actor in public, looking for some kind of companionship or friends. Corey Haim didn't have great luck when it came to romantic relationships either. One of his exes, actress Alyssa Milano, once said that she tried to support him and get him the help he needed, to no avail. Corey Haim, despite achieving success as an actor early in his career, didn't have a lot of money at the end of his life. According to E! Online, the actor's drug habit left him with little money. When Haim filed for bankruptcy in 1997, he only had a few assets he could claim, namely his BMW, $100 in cash, and royalties that were worth somewhere around $7,500. That's definitely not enough money to ensure any sort of financial security. In 2010, Haim had been going through such tough times that his funeral was taken care of by a celebrity memorabilia organization that paid for the expenses. Even though Haim had tried to save his failing career, he simply hadn't been able to salvage his finances and get back on his feet. In 2001, he even attempted to make some money by auctioning his hair and teeth on eBay. eBay took down Haim's auctions because they violated the website's policies that prohibit people from selling body parts. Corey Haim battled drug addiction for the better part of his life, and he attempted suicide via drugs on more than one occasion. Corey Feldman admitted that his old friend tried to intentionally overdose multiple times, telling an interviewer, "Corey made a lot of mistakes. He always tried to be the best person he could." Feldman also described an incident in which he found his friend foaming at the mouth due to an overdose. Feldman saved Haim by pouring charcoal into his mouth.
We all are aware of the fact that Corey Haim has had a long and detailed drug history and battled addiction for many, many years.
Before he died, Corey Haim was unwell and suffering from a bout of flu. He was living with his mom. When he passed away, speculation was rife, and there were rumors about suicide or a drug overdose, both of which were debunked later. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255. Corey Haim's sudden death took many by surprise. The actor passed away in 2010, leaving many distraught. As per CNN, Haim's mother called paramedics to their apartment during the early hours of March 10th after Haim started to feel dizzy and later became unresponsive. No illegal drugs were found at Haim's home, but there were a few prescription medicines. Corey Feldman spoke about the moment he learned of his friend's passing, saying tears immediately began streaming down his face.
This is a man who was pushing forward and more than anything in the world wanted to be there for his mother.
He added that it was important for everyone to learn from what happened to his old friend, telling an interviewer, "We must all take this as a lesson in how we treat the people we share this world with while they are still here to make a difference. I hope the art Corey has left behind will be remembered as the passion of that for which he truly lived." Later, it was revealed that the actor had died of pneumonia and other natural causes. He did not overdose. Haim, for his part, had been determined for a long time. A few years before his passing, Haim said that he wanted people to remember him and learn from him wherever they mentioned comebacks.
Chris Farley's unique comedy stylings delighted Saturday Night Live viewers and moviegoers throughout the 90s. But despite how hilarious he was on screen, in many ways he was the archetypal sad clown. This is his tragic real-life story. Farley burst into the mainstream when he joined the cast of Saturday Night Live in 1990. He quickly became an extremely well-liked part of the show, which paved his path toward movie stardom. However, all good things must come to an end, and in Farley's case, that end came in a profoundly uncomfortable way when both he and his best friend Adam Sandler were let go from the show in 1995. In a 2017 interview with the Daily Beast, Sandler discussed that fateful day back in 1995. "We kind of quit at the same time as being fired. It was the end of the run for us. The fact that me and him got fired? Who knows?" While the end was rough, the journey was special, as Sandler did point out that the two had a good run on the show. While getting fired hurt them a lot back then, other opportunities eventually arose soon enough. Sandler also made sure to mention that he misses Farley, whom he views as a dominant force in comedy. As he put it, he's the strongest presence I've ever seen.
He was the best. We all loved that boy.
Farley's life was often tumultuous thanks to his fondness for drink and drugs. By the time of his untimely death on December 18, 1997, he'd been indulging in several substances for a long, long time. Alcohol, cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and mushrooms were all on the table, along with his penchant for overeating. While Farley was a man with many vices, he was also acutely aware of his shortcomings and often tried to get his destructive habits under control. He went to Overeaters Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. He did stints at rehab and weight loss centers. According to Entertainment Weekly, during his final 2 years alone, he made at least 17 trips to rehab and attempted all sorts of purges and programs.
This time I'm not just talking the talk, but I'm going to be walking the walk.
Farley visited one particular detox center, Hazelden, so often that a friend of his said they should have named a wing after him. Unfortunately, none of Farley's many attempts at cleaning up his act stuck, as he always relapsed sooner or later. Everyone who's familiar with Chris Farley's particular brand of comedy knows that he was extremely physical and agile for such a large man. This was no mere fluke, as he really did have great athletic prowess. A 1998 Rolling Stone article discussed how he was an excellent athlete during his school years. He was a fantastic swimmer, and his size made him a natural choice for the football team. At his peak, he was an all-city defensive lineman, but alas, his dreams of becoming a pro never came to fruition, as his 5'9", 230-pound frame wasn't quite large enough to make it in the big leagues. Having been let down by his own size, young Farley was left to figure out another way to make sense of his life. He was still quite big enough to draw ridicule from other kids, and he developed a habit of making fun of himself as a coping mechanism. So he decided to draw inspiration from his hero, John Belushi, and make comedy his new contact sport. Even though his original football-based career plans didn't pan out, the physical training he went through helped with his whirlwind style of comedy. SNL boss Lorne Michaels has even described Farley as an athlete who knew how to use his body and could play hurt. Being on the heavier side wasn't always easy for Farley. In fact, he endured a childhood full of bullying in which he was pelted with some awful nicknames. He revealed to Rolling Stone some of the worst. Fartley, Lardass, Tubby, and of course Fatso was standard. To counteract this attack, he often used his talent for comedy as a defense mechanism, mocking his own weight before others could. Fame and adulthood weren't enough for Farley to escape the occasional nasty remark, and the barbs weren't always weight-themed. He told Rolling Stone a story of meeting Hustler magazine founder Larry Flynt at the Academy Awards, revealing that Flynt told him, "It's good to see somebody make it that didn't make it all the way through puberty." It goes without saying that Farley was less than impressed by this burn, and indeed he described his own reaction as, "Well, f*** you." Farley suffered from a serious heart disease called atherosclerosis, which authorities considered to be a significant contributing factor to his death. This condition is no laughing matter. According to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, it makes the fat, calcium, and other things in your blood build up inside the arteries as a substance called plaque. As the buildup progresses, it disrupts blood flow, giving your body less and less oxygen-rich blood. This can lead to some serious problems like strokes, heart attacks, or even death. As it happens, Farley isn't the only celebrity who suffered from atherosclerosis and died before their time. Singer Whitney Houston also struggled with addiction and had the same heart condition. When she died in 2012, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Chief stated that the cause of her death was drowning due to atherosclerotic heart disease and cocaine use. As funny and talented as Chris Farley was, his success wasn't enough to keep his insecurity at bay.
Dang it, what an idiot!
He was uncomfortable with his weight, and he secretly feared that he might lose his comedy edge. When Rolling Stone interviewed him, he opened up about his deep insecurities and admitted that he was, quote, always terrified. According to Farley himself, his often bombastic behavior was a reaction to his fear of people, and he was deeply scared that his movies wouldn't do well and he'd stop getting acting work. Other sources of terror included kissing up to studio executives, losing weight only to discover that he wouldn't be funny anymore, and even telling a great joke. He felt that when the roar of laughter died down, what followed was, quote, the most terrifying silence you've ever heard. That's a lot of insecurities piling up on one man, especially one who lived his life in the limelight. And Farley's fears and insecurities weren't all about his professional life. He also had worries based around religion, and he was concerned that he'd never be able to settle down with a nice woman and start a family. In the documentary I Am Chris Farley, one of Farley's SNL castmates, Mike Myers, talked about how he used to do improv with Farley at Chicago's Second City Comedy Club. He noted that Farley had a reputation as a physically hazardous coworker. As Myers put it, I was scared to death because he had already knocked someone's tooth out and given someone else a scar just from being so crazy. Farley eventually made it to the greener pastures of Saturday Night Live and beyond, but this didn't necessarily mean that his coworkers were any safer than before. In 2016, Adam Sandler revealed on an episode of Conan that Farley once threatened to punch David Spade, his good friend and castmate. Spade took care to stay out of Farley's reach the following day, even after Farley dismissed this threatening voicemail as a joke.
It didn't sound like you were kidding. He goes, don't tell Lauren! Oh, yeah.
During a 2015 appearance on The Late Late Show with James Corden, Spade said that things once got much worse when the pair were shooting Tommy Boy. Farley hated when Spade went to have drinks with Rob Lowe while he slept, and he had his vengeance the next day as he crunched Spade's hand with his boots, and then Spade threw his Diet Coke at him.
It was straight out of, like, Atlanta Housewives. They
fought.
Yeah.
What do you remember?
And then he threw me down the stairs, and then they
It was
started
like a proper fight.
Yeah.
You had a proper fight about Rob Lowe.
On December 18, 1997, Chris Farley was found dead in his Chicago apartment by his brother, John. His system contained traces of cocaine, morphine, and marijuana. He was only 33 years old. The 4-day bender that ended his life came shortly after he returned home from a quick stint at the Hazelden Detox Center in Minneapolis. An avid churchgoer, he spent a few days going to Mass and doing normal holiday preparations like baking Christmas cookies and getting a tricked-out tree. His friend Jillian Seeley said that the comedian was quite enthusiastic about an upcoming movie he was starring in called Almost Heroes. Unfortunately, this relatively mellow existence didn't last. On December 14th, Farley began bar hopping through the city's drinking establishments, accompanied by various ladies and tearing through a huge quantity of alcohol and narcotics. According to the book The Chris Farley Show, the comedian's last moments were spent taking drugs with a call girl who eventually stole his watch, took pictures of him collapsed on the living room floor, and left after leaving a note. Farley died alone, and his final words reportedly were, "Don't leave me." It would be inaccurate to say that Chris Farley wasn't successful or popular. He was undoubtedly well-known and well-liked. However, a quick glance at his IMDb page shows that while his idol, John Belushi, had Animal House and Blues Brothers to cement his legacy, Farley never really had quite the same star-making roles on the silver screen. Some of his fans might argue that the likes of Tommy Boy and Black Sheep are plenty beloved, but there's no arguing that his career was cut tragically short. Had he lived a little longer or been a little luckier, however, the situation might have been very different. In 2012, Splitsider looked into some of the parts Farley never got to play. These included some roles that happened before he passed away, like the ones that went to Jim Carrey in The Cable Guy and Randy Quaid in Kingpin. But the juiciest, most potentially legendary parts are the ones that he missed because of his untimely demise. He was supposed to have a major role in Ghostbusters 3, which ultimately never saw the light of day. He was reportedly considering starring in the film version of the novel A Confederacy of Dunces, and he'd already met with David Mamet regarding a biopic about the silent film actor and comedian Fatty Arbuckle. And it must be noted that he'd landed the title role in Shrek, and he even recorded nearly all of the ogre's lines before passing away.
Nothing like a fire and a noble romantic mission to warm the cockles of your heart.
Yeah. I like my cockles room temperature, thank you very much.
Farley's various addictions were not a surprise to those close to him or to the public, especially towards the end. As one Chicago columnist wrote, his may have been the least surprising premature death of a celebrity in show business history. That's not to say that people didn't try to help him along the way. Old friends and family were painfully aware of his excesses. His old SNL boss, Lorne Michaels, fellow actors such as Dan Aykroyd, David Spade, and Tom Arnold, and Farley's own manager all tried to get him to cut out his vast intake. Alas, good advice worked just as poorly as rehab clinics, and sooner or later Farley was back to his old ways. It was particularly bad during his final days, which his friend Gillian Seeley described in a heartbreaking way. According to her, I know he wanted to get sober, but it was like he had cancer and the chemo treatment didn't work anymore. One thing that actually worked on Farley was work itself. He was aware that whenever he was making movies, he had no choice but to stay clean because the studios wanted to protect their investment and make sure he was on his best behavior. No surprise then that when he was making Almost Heroes, daily AA meetings were reportedly a requirement. When he was recording his lines for Shrek, things were even stricter and he was watched around the clock. But nobody can work all the time, a truth that fans and loved ones of Farley will never forget.
Don Knotts will always be remembered for his role as Deputy Sheriff Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show. While Don Knotts was especially funny on the small screen, his tragic real-life story includes a wounded childhood, struggles with insomnia and pill addiction, and later severe health struggles. Jesse Donald Knotts was born in Morgantown, West Virginia in 1924. When Knotts' brother-in-law Daniel Davidson did a deep dive into Knotts' childhood in his book Andy and Dawn, The Making of a Friendship and a Classic American TV Show, he wrote that Knotts' childhood was horrible. Knotts was an accidental child that came along 14 years after his next closest sibling. His two older brothers shared their bedroom with the family's various boarders while Knotts slept on a cot in the kitchen. His father, Jesse Sr., was mostly bedridden by the time Knotts was born. Closer Weekly says the elder Knotts was a schizophrenic alcoholic, while the New York Times adds that he also suffered from hysterical blindness. Abuse was a regular part of his childhood. Around age 30, Knotts' mother, Elsie, asked him if he remembered a horrifying confrontation where his father had threatened him with a knife. In order to get from his kitchen bedroom to literally anywhere else, Knotts needed to walk through the living room and past the sofa where his father spent most of his time. Sometimes a young Don would sneak by. Otherwise, it invariably ended with threats. It's no wonder then that as a young boy, Don Knotts was already pale, thin, and was regularly sick. He'd later recall, "I did not come into the world with a great deal of promise." Knotts' relationship with his brothers was complicated as well. They were funny, says the New York Times, especially his brother William, nicknamed Shadow, an impressive feat when there was so little to laugh about.
And I think it was probably because of him that I really got interested in comedy myself.
But there was more to it. Knotts' daughter Karen would later tell Closer Weekly that her father was mistreated by his brothers too. They were often drunk and fought until Shadow tragically died after suffering an asthma attack. Knotts was only a teenager at the time. It's difficult to imagine growing up in that kind of environment with that kind of fear, and Don Knotts had a deep desire for happiness. He later revealed some of the coping mechanisms he used, saying that he managed to find some comfort by filling my space with imaginary characters with whom I would act out some happy drama. Things started to improve as he entered his teenage years. His daughter Karen told Closer Weekly, when his father passed, he was 13 years old. At that point, that burden, that huge burden, lifted off him, and he became old enough that he was able to get the other brother under control, so he was no longer terrorized at home. She also recalled that once her father entered high school, he really started to come into his own. He was class president, he had a yearbook column, he was popular, and he had a best friend for the first time. But in 1976, he told the Los Angeles Times he had a slightly different view of his youth. I felt like a loser. I was unhappy, I think, most of the time. We were terribly poor, and I hated my size. It's perhaps not entirely surprising then that it was during Don Knotts' early teens that he turned to a friend named Danny. Who was Danny? Ventriloquist's dummy. And with the dummy, he started performing. There's an oft-repeated rumor about Knotts that says he was once an incredibly strict Marine Corps drill instructor. That's balderdash, and it also ignores his actual military service. According to the New York Times, when World War II rolled around, everyone was convinced that the military wouldn't take such a sickly, undernourished man. But they did, and they found the perfect place for him. Knotts toured the Pacific Front as a member of the comedy troupe Stars and Gripes, who were tasked with entertaining the troops. And he also worked as a nurse when those services were needed. It was while he was in the military that he caught the eye of another, older comedian named Red Ford. Ford's comments stuck with him, and he would remember what he said years later. "You know something? You're a funny little son of a bitch." By the time he was out, he wasn't a ventriloquist anymore. He had moved on to other types of comedy. And according to Appalachian Talk, he threw his dummy Danny off a ship while he was somewhere in the South Pacific. After the military, and after graduating from West Virginia University in 1948, Don Knotts headed for New York City. He had $100 in his pocket, according to the LA Times, and his career started out like many. He was rejected. He was turned down for a series of radio gigs, then landed a spot on a soap opera, but it took 7 years before he got a role on Broadway, some attention, and a co-star that would become a lifelong friend. That co-star was Andy Griffith, and the play was a comedy called No Time for Sergeants. From there, he started making a reputation as the perfect person to play a certain type of character: nervous, anxious, and non-threatening. And here's the thing, the New York Times says that he absolutely stole some of the material he was doing, and those he stole from were largely fine with it. Why? Because the small, thin, nervous Knotts was the perfect sidekick to make others look more manly. So anyone he shared the screen with looked more like a leading man.
Well, I mean, any complaints? Anything wrong?
With me? Oh, gosh, no. I'm as strong as a bull.
It was Don Knotts who went to Andy Griffith and suggested himself for the role of Barney Fife. And according to the LA Times, he was almost joking when he said it. But Griffith absolutely went for it, and it was a match made in TV heaven. Knotts had made it and found the success that most aspiring actors and comedians could only dream of. But not all was well behind the scenes. According to Davidson, Knotts had long struggled with massive feelings of inferiority. Long before he even made it to the small screen alongside Andy Griffith, he would become so distraught that before a performance, he might spend days in bed. In the 1950s, his doctors gave him a prescription for anti-anxiety drugs, to which he became addicted. Wrapped up in his anxiety was hypochondria too, along with chronic insomnia. Davidson says that his insomnia stemmed from a tendency to stay out too late and enjoy the company of too many women. But he also says that Knotts quit all his bad habits with the snap of his fingers. After an accidental overdose of sleeping pills and an ultimatum from his third wife, Knotts changed at least some of his ways. While success did come for the poor boy from West Virginia, Don Knotts' daughter Karen told Closer Weekly that the long, hard years of his childhood definitely left their mark, saying things came back to haunt him. Another part, according to Davidson, was that Knotts had difficulty reconciling his lives. He constantly played characters who were submissive, anxious, nervous, and often the butt of the joke. And at the same time, he'd found more success than he'd ever imagined. Reconciling those two things proved difficult. And Davidson says that Knotts was a good way into his career when he found himself sitting in the office of a Hollywood therapist, screaming and cursing God in an attempt to rid himself of depression, self-doubt, and the lessons of his Bible-loving father.
I've never really amounted to anything. My whole life has just been one big failure after another.
Still, Knotts' daughter Karen remembered he was mercurial. He had a lot of different kinds of moods. He fought a lot of depression, and I helped him, or thought I did, because I could see how he had this endless loop of thought that would always lead to a downward spiral. On a more positive note, she felt that by the end of his life, he had overcome a lot of his past trauma and that he'd worked hard to become a happy person who loved people. There are a few different stories as to why Don Knotts left the Andy Griffith Show. His daughter Karen told Closer Weekly that the work was hard and there were only so many storylines the show could go through. According to the LA Times, though, Knotts had only ever intended on doing 5 seasons of the show when it started, and that's what he did. In 1967, he told them, "The grind gets to you in television, and that's primarily the reason I'm concentrating on pictures." The Andy Griffith Show continued on without him for the most part, though he did continue to make the occasional guest appearance. parents. But the general consensus is that without Knotts, it just wasn't the same. There is a positive here, though, and that's the fact that Griffith and Knotts remain friends. The tragedy, on the other hand, is that Knotts never quite made it in the movie career that he'd been hoping for. After leaving TV, he scored a 5-film deal with Universal. In hindsight, movies like The Incredible Mr. Limpet, The Reluctant Astronaut, and The Ghost in Mr. Chicken were absolutely brilliant. Not only did Mr. Limpet kickstart the idea of mixing animation and live action, but later comedians from Martin Short to Jim Carrey have cited them as a major inspiration. Unfortunately, at the time, Knotts didn't see the critical acclaim that he thought he should have. When Knotts was only 57 years old, he was given a troubling diagnosis of macular degeneration. According to the Mayo Clinic, the condition interferes with a person's ability to see directly in front of them and makes anything in their direct line of sight appear distorted or blurry. In some cases, it can even lead to an inability to recognize faces, and it usually gets progressively worse. Knotts struggled with the diagnosis. Per the New York Times, Knotts once said, "I got pretty depressed for a while. And then one day, I said to myself, I bet a blind person would give his right arm to have the vision I have." Knotts continued to work, and according to the American Macular Degeneration Foundation, he continued to participate in his favorite hobby, swimming laps. Eventually, though, his eyesight had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer drive or read. In the early 70s, variety shows were all the rage, which led to the opportunity of a lifetime, The Don Knotts Show. The show seemed like it had everything that would have made it a major hit. According to MeTV, they had given the show 22 weeks to make an impact, and it didn't. Knotts talked about the show, saying, "We did all kinds of things. There was tremendous competition that season for variety, because everybody and his brother had a variety show." The show was on NBC, and Knotts went on to say that they essentially had stolen him away from CBS. That didn't go over well, but everyone had been so convinced it was going to be a hit that they didn't see where it could possibly go wrong. The Andy Griffith Show director Bob Sweeney was even brought in to try to fix things. MASH's Gary Berghoff was brought in as a recurring sketch comedy character, and they even debuted acts like The Carpenters. Still, it came to a premature end, while Don Knotts continued to make appearances on other variety shows. It was in the early 2000s that Closer Weekly reports that Don Knotts was diagnosed with lung cancer. By that time, he and his longtime friend Andy Griffith had fallen a bit out of touch, but Griffith rushed to his side and was right there with him as he fought it. According to their Matlock co-star Nancy Stafford, as soon as the two of them were together, it was like they never skipped a beat. They fell into this routine of singing, laughing, and telling jokes together. It was hysterical. They had this amazing communication.
I. You. We. Us.
Our.
Fa.
Fa. 407 years ago, our fa.
Third.
Unfortunately, Knotts would ultimately lose his battle with cancer. He passed away on February 24, 2006, and people reported that one of the very last people to go and sit at his bedside was Andy Griffith. Griffith later recalled, "I told him I loved him, and I held his hand. His chest heaved several times, and I believe he heard my voice." 14 years after passing, his daughter Karen shared some regrets. He had this funniness that was just completely, insanely natural. When he was dying, he was making us laugh in hysterics. He was literally dying, but he did something or said something that caused my stepmother and I to go into fits of laughter, which is why I ran out. And that is what Karen Knotts regretted, leaving her dad's side to laugh. She added that she had been telling the story to the director Howard Storm, who told her she should have stayed, laughed out loud, and let him hear her. He was right. I should have just stood there and blasted out laughing.
The enigma that is Jared Leto. Some think of him as Jordan Catalano from the 90s TV show My So-Called Life. Others are fans of his band 30 Seconds to Mars. He also starred as the Joker, but real life hasn't been easy for the star.
Jared Leto was born in 1971 in Bossier City, a small town near Shreveport in northwestern Louisiana.
His dad, Tony Bryant, abandoned his family, which meant that Jared spent a chunk of his childhood without a father. Although it's not something he tends to bring up much, he made an exception during a press conference at Cannes in 2014 while promoting Dallas Buyers Club. His memories are few, as Jared was just a baby when his father left the picture, but the star made a snide remark while describing what he imagines were his father's last words to him, saying,
"He just flicked a cigarette and said, 'I'll see you, kid, just going to the store to get a carton of milk,' and never came back."
Jared would never see his father again. When he was 8 years old, his father committed suicide for unknown reasons. Jared, his brother Shannon, and their mother Constance moved in with her parents temporarily. Due to the fact that Jared's grandfather served in the military, the future star moved to multiple locations throughout the United States during his childhood. Per ESME, Constance eventually married Carl Leto, who adopted Jared and his brother. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK-8255. Constance was a single mom for much of Jared Leto's youth, and at times relied on food stamps to get by. The star's admiration for his mother and how she raised him was on full display during his heartfelt 2014 Oscars acceptance speech. Addressing his wild child upbringing, which involved foraging in forests and traipsing around the world with his mom and brother, he explained how the experience gave him new perspectives, saying, "Just having the art communal hippie experience as a child, there wasn't a clear line that was drawn. We didn't try and curtail it and stunt any of that kind of growth." The Leto family's bond is prominent in many of Jared's and Shannon's songs performed by their band 30 Seconds to Mars. According to ESME, one song, Depuis le Début, ends with a music box playing Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, which is an ode to their mother, who used to put the boys to sleep by playing that same music box. He also credited his mom with helping him kick his drug habit. But Jared Leto's Oscars speech was the biggest homage of all. He told the audience at the 2014 Academy Awards,
"She was a high school dropout and a single mom, but somehow she managed to make a better life for herself and her children. She encouraged her kids to be creative, to work hard, and to do something special. I love you, Mom. Thank you for teaching me to dream."
Cue millions of hearts a-fluttering across the globe. By the age of 16, Jared had very little direction and thought for a time that he might become a drug dealer. He delved deep into the seedy underbelly of the drug scene as a teenager and dabbled in petty theft, but eventually came to a fork in the road. He told Big Issue, "There was a moment involving a gun and some cocaine that may have been a turning point for me. I knew it wasn't good." Fortunately, Jared managed to get his life under control. He initially moved to Los Angeles soon after a stint in art school at age 19 to pursue directing, where he quickly crossed over into acting. At 22, he landed his breakout role as Jordan Catalano in My So-Called Life, becoming a teen heartthrob overnight. According to an interview with The Independent, he is essentially straight edge now and refrains from drinking or drugs. He explained, "The opportunity cost is too high. Some drugs are incredible, but the risk versus reward is out of line. I just saw too many examples of what not to do." Jared Leto and his brother Shannon have played together in 30 Seconds to Mars, a controversial arena rock band, since 1998. Jared never had any specific ambitions to become any kind of celebrity or rock star, and in an interview with Rolling Stone, stated that he thought musicians and actors were like magic, saying, "It was royalty, or you were born into it, or it was some stroke of luck or genius." As a musician himself, Jared has experienced highs like his band setting a Guinness World Record for most live shows during a single album cycle in 2011, with 309 concerts. However, there have also been lows, like an ugly $30 million lawsuit. Jared told The Hollywood Reporter, "This was not a fight against a record company, but against corruption. A record company can be a beneficial thing, but a corporation that engages artists with these convoluted contracts that leaves them in a state of terminal debt."
Just because you can get away with something doesn't mean it's okay to do.
Jared Leto seems to have a thing for choosing roles that require risky physical and psychological transformations. His first notable extreme part was playing a heroin junkie in 2000's Requiem for a Dream. In order to be true to the role, he not only became celibate, but he also decided that he had to lose a ton of weight and hang out with drug users on the streets of New York. He told Al Bawaba, "Every night was an adventure, whether it was someone missing the vein in their arm and their hand fills up with poison, or they overdose, or you're hanging out and it's like, remember that girl we were hanging out with last night? Well, she's dead. I got robbed one night, but I just tried to become one of the group. According to an interview with Movie Line, Jared was left so traumatized by the end of the film that he fled to a monastery where he fed on plain fish and potatoes. Was it worth it? That's up to the star to decide. Jared Leto's strange existential journey of getting into character for his role in Requiem for a Dream didn't deter him from taking on even more challenging and dangerous acting roles. For instance, he swiftly gained a whopping 65 pounds for his role as John Lennon's assassin, Mark David Chapman, for the film Chapter 27. How did he gain that much weight so quickly? He literally chugged pints of microwave chocolate Haagen-Dazs ice cream twice a day. Frankly, it's surprising he could gain weight this way, because the average person who did that would be vomiting their calories on the regular. In time, Jared ended up confined to a wheelchair because simply walking became painful, according to Digital Spy. The experience also left him doubting if his body would ever get back to where it was prior to the shoot. Admitting that he ultimately regretted the experience, the actor told The Guardian, "Really, it's a stupid thing to do. I got gout, and my cholesterol went up so fast in such a short time that my doctors wanted to put me on Lipitor, which is for much, much older people." Again though, a fascinating journey. Ever the optimist, the star saw a diamond among the coal. But did he learn his lesson? Not really. Not to be outdone by his previous performances, Jared dropped to a measly 116 pounds for his award-winning turn as transgender character Rayon in Dallas Buyers Club. He claimed in an interview with the New York Times that he would sometimes eat only half a cucumber for an entire day, saying, "The number one rule is you have to stop eating. The number two rule is you have to stop eating." He told Entertainment Weekly, "Sometimes you just want to chew on something so you find something that has a lot of empty calories. I basically was chewing on shoe leather, anything that would satiate the hunger a little bit." Jared also shaved his eyebrows and assumed the form of a woman's body as much as possible without undergoing surgery. He also refused to break character on set, wearing his high heels everywhere. But hey, he won an Oscar, so who's gonna argue with his method? When Jared Leto commits to an idea, he obviously goes all in. But when it comes to video directing, he'd rather his audience forget that he's the one behind the camera. That's why he created the pseudonym Bartholomew Cubbins. Naturally. Jared told the New York Times, "It's one of my favorite Dr. Seuss characters. I wanted to not have any of the distractions that may come along with putting my name on a video that I was starring in." Leto, or Cubbins, became a bit controversial when he directed a 13-minute short film for 30 Seconds to Mars' song Hurricane, which was banned from television around the world for its sexual, violent, and nightmarish imagery. According to MTV, channels sent long lists of what was required to be censored in order to secure airtime. While MTV never banned the video, they did remove it from their rotation. So what was so scandalous about the video? An excerpt detailing the content described it, noting, "A creepy gimp wearing a black suit and leather mask and toting a sledgehammer bursts into the room, sending Leto flying out of a 40-story window to the street below. Later, a rabbi, priest, and imam appear and toss their books into a bonfire. Cubbins sure is an incendiary fellow." Jared Leto's take on the Joker in 2016's Suicide Squad was so controversial that neither Warner Brothers nor the public were thrilled by his interpretation of the infamous DC Comics villain.
I never thought in a million years that I would have the chance to play a role like this.
As for Jared, he blamed the editing, claiming that the film was recut from dramatic to comedic. Sure, maybe. What we do know is that the star terrorized his castmates during production, and true to his method form, never broke character. This included sending Margot Robbie, who played his character's love interest Harley Quinn, a love letter in a black box with a live rat inside. He also sent bullets to Will Smith, and the cast received used condoms and adult toys, as well as a dead pig for their first table read. Charming. During an E! News interview, Jared explained the reason behind what he had done, saying, "I did a lot of things to create a dynamic, to create an element of surprise, of spontaneity, and to really break down any kind of walls that may be there. The Joker is somebody who doesn't really respect things like personal space or boundaries. That's really all you need to know about how the film shoot went down, but it sure made for an entertaining press tour." In the end, Jared Leto's performance equated to about 10 minutes of screen time in the final cut of Suicide Squad. To make things extra awkward, the star had originally been billed as a lead, and of course, he didn't let that slide when it came time to promote the film.
Well, to the people who want more Joker, I say, me too.
However, despite negative reviews and the fact that studio execs were less than thrilled with Jared's strange antics, there was still talk of a Joker and Harley Quinn spin-off in development at Warner Brothers. But then, Jared decided to ruffle a few more feathers. According to The Hollywood Reporter, he tried to halt production of Todd Phillips' Joker film starring Joaquin Phoenix, who won Best Actor in 2019 for his noticeably different interpretation of the villain. This tiff also endangered Jared's relationship with his reps at the Creative Artists Agency. So when it came time to make the spin-off, the studio decided to make a film about Harley Quinn, 2020's Birds of Prey. Jared wasn't invited to participate, nor was the Joker even written into the script. Ouch.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.